Dana chortled. And they never will because you're scared of everything. That's not true. Oh yeah. Prove it. Morgan shoved her a third time. Hit me back. No. What, are you scared? Gillian giggled. No. Then do it. Morgan narrowed her eyes. Hit me. Adriana suddenly felt something snap within her. Leave me alone, you big, stupid bullies, she bellowed. Absolute silence rang inside the arena for several seconds. Then Tari's low voice began to echo around them. How dare you, she said menacingly. You are not fit to be in training. I was just trying to. Silence. Terry shouted. I see your chief has allowed your weakness to permeate this group of miserable excuses for hooligans. Well, no more. Adriana shut her eyes and grabbed fistfuls of her hair as Tari continued to holler at her. The woman was beginning to get more animated in her retaliation against the girl's interruption. Her voice was beginning to echo in the Haddock girl's ears, causing the noise in her head to become unbearably loud. She wanted it to stop, everything in the whole world to be quiet for once. Why wouldn't it stop? Why wouldn't it ever stop? And then, quite suddenly, everything went quiet. Like silence, but not really silent. Just that nice kind of quiet, like the sound of a page being turned in a book or the little noises around Trollbridge when she stopped walking so she could listen. It was like the steady drumming of her heart in her head whenever she lay upside down on the couch. It was a soothing calm that comforted her and made her feel warm. And though Tari's mouth was still moving, the words she was forming could not reach Adriana anymore. The comforting quiet lasted as long as Tari's rant. Once it was over, the ringing silence brought Adriana back to the present. Tari was pointing at the door, her face bright red. Adriana looked over at Eric, who appeared to be livid. He was standing up and his mouth was open, as if he was just about to give Tari a piece of his mind. She shook her head at him and he slowly shut his mouth and sat back down. She then looked over at Finn, who was staring at his lap and looking quite mortified. But he didn't get up to defend his sister. Not one movement. Not one word. As she walked out of the arena, she thought that that was the most hurtful thing of all. But now she had a weapon. The soothing quiet. If she couldn't make it stop, at least she could block it out. And that, along with her little tricks, was the very last defense she had. Chapter 9, A Crushing Reality. Chapter text. Hiccup was confused. Adriana wasn't always the easiest child to raise, but her behavior usually made sense. But this was not the case that day. Her bright green eyes were focused on the group of older boys as if they were the most interesting things the world could offer. And considering the fact that it was a monstrous nightmare attempting to get her attention as she stared, that was saying something. Wishing that Eric hadn't interrupted him as he asked his child what she was up to, he turned back to the village, intending to see how Gobber was holding up, when he spotted his wife ambling toward him, Stormfly at her heels. Okay, I know that look, she said as she got within earshot. What's up? I'm confused. Hiccup glanced over toward the arena. I found Addy staring at that group over there just now. Astrid looked over to the group and a small smile crossed her face. That group of boys? Yes. Did one of them take something from her? It makes no sense. I don't even think she knows them very well. Hiccup frowned and crossed his arms. Oh, Hiccup. Astrid's smile widened. Can't you tell what's going on? Is something going on? Hiccup asked, feeling even more bewildered. Astrid patted her husband on the back, sensing that she would have to do a lot more comforting when he found out the truth. It's very obvious what's going on. If she was just staring at them, that is. Okay. Hiccup raised an eyebrow. What? He paused as Astrid opened her mouth to explain it, and then something hit him. Wait, he exclaimed. She doesn't. Hiccup, I think our daughter has. No. Hiccup wailed. Don't say it. A crush. Gah. Hiccup put his face in his hands. She's way too young for that. She's 10. Astrid chortled. That's plenty old enough. Besides, it's harmless. These things happen. I didn't think I'd have to deal with her chasing boys until she was 18. Hiccup whimpered. 18. Astrid rolled her eyes. Why would she wait that long? Because I'm supposed to be the only man in her life for the foreseeable future. Hiccup poked himself in the chest. If she starts chasing boys now, who am I anymore? Same as always. Astrid put her hand on his chin and turned his head to face her. Her daddy. And no matter how many boys she chases, you're always going to be there for her. So be her rock. Hiccup shook his head. I don't like this. Of course not. Your baby's growing up. Astrid patted his chin. But you remember how rough that was. She's going to need you more than ever. Just you wait until puberty. We are not mentioning the P word until we absolutely have to. Hiccup winked at her, a small smile crossing his face once more. The moment was interrupted when a loud cry came from the village. Hiccup and Astrid exchanged looks before taking off after the shouting voice. They stopped outside the Thorsten house, feeling quite bewildered as Ali the insincere burst through the door. What is that? She shouted quite loudly. What is making that sound? Hiccup and Astrid exchanged looks for a split second before the sound to which Ali was referring reached their ears. A sort of high-pitched humming and low growling, at least that was the best way anyone could describe it. Ali's room was apparently playing host to a singing terrible terror. An invisible one, by the looks of things. That is, without a doubt, the most horrible sound I have ever heard. Get it out. Ali whined, covering her ears. Relax, Ali. Astrid said in an unconvincingly sweet voice. It's just a terrible terror. Nothing to worry about. But where? Ali grimaced as the high-pitched noise reached an ear-splitting note. I've looked all over and I can't find it. Oh, I'm sure it's around here somewhere. Hiccup strolled into the room. Truth be told, he thought the song of the terrible terror was rather pleasant, so the noises didn't bother him in the slightest. Ali's reaction was just icing on the cake, so to speak. They can be pretty stealthy sometimes. Well, if you don't find it before I do, I'm going to kill it. Ali said through gritted teeth. Oh, don't do that. Hiccup chirped. Have a little compassion. It's just an innocent little well, there you are. He smiled at the red terrible terror, which he had finally found lodged up the chimney. Are you bugging the nice lady? Come on over here. I'll find you a nice place to sing. The terror recognized Hiccup's scent as being similar to the scent of the nice little human who had put her up to this in the first place, so she immediately scuttled down the chimney and settled on his shoulder. Ah! Nasty little thing. Ali shuddered. Get it as far away from here as possible. That can be arranged. Hiccup mumbled irritably. All right, come on. I think my kids'll appreciate your singing more than she does. Well, you're affectionate, he added as the terror nuzzled his cheek. Do you have a person out there somewhere? The terror licked his cheek and he let out a distinctly unmanly giggle. Astrid sighed in amusement. Her husband was adorable when he interacted with new dragons. She was so entertained by him that she didn't notice the death glares he was receiving from the outcast chief. Ali let out an angry growl and went back into the house. She would make Hiccup pay tomorrow. Hiccup and Astrid had been slightly surprised when the terror they brought home immediately flew to a gloomy-looking Adriana, but they didn't question it. She had a tendency to put new dragons at ease. Despite the parents' strange silence throughout dinner, Finn continued to prattle on about the upcoming duel. Adriana pushed her food around her plate absently, glancing up at her father when he'd wince or tense at some of Finn's words. Finn pretended not to notice his father's jumpiness until a sharp look from his mother forced him to launch into another tale about the day's events. The family had gone to bed early in anticipation of the Thorfist games. Hiccup spent most of that evening trying to put the duel out of his mind, but it was to no avail as the seconds ticked closer to the moment he dreaded. When the moment finally came, Hiccup lightly frowned at Astrid's pensive expression as he once again tightened the bracer over his right wrist. She paced with crossed arms through the entryway leading into the academy. He felt the urge to search across the large space for Ali, but he instead focused on his fretting wife, who so clearly was trying not to appear to be fretting. With a heavy sigh he finally walked over to her and rested his hands on her shoulders. Hey, it's only to first blood. It's going to be fine. Her wide blue eyes full of fear startled him, and his confidence shrunk down a size. I never wanted to see you in a duel again. Ever. It's just, that first one was too traumatic and I don't ever want to see you covered in BL. Astrid. He squeezed her shoulders and bent lower to look in her eyes. She forced herself to take a deep breath before looking back at him. First blood does not mean she's going to rip me to shreds like he did. It's different. How do you know that? What if she uses a single swing powerful enough to slice half of your face off? Or stabs you before she can check the strength behind her SW. Hiccup sealed his mouth around hers before she could utter another word. The kiss was firm and warm, and he caught her lips in his a second, third time before pulling away. It's going to be okay, he smiled at her. She stared at him with confused blue eyes before sighing heavily. I promise, I'll be fine. She'll probably kick my butt so fast I'll be back here in 5 minutes. No, you had better win so I don't have to clean you up afterward. Griping again, I see. Astrid punched his bicep firmly and he grinned. Violence. Shut up and kiss me, idiot. Astrid pulled her mouth to his and was glad to feel herself relax against his frame. He was right, she did need to calm down. No matter how intense this stupid duel got, it is nothing compared to the intensity of the duel with Dager. He'd be back in her arms in a matter of minutes. Hey Dad, are you? Finn's excited voice filled the tunnel along with the sounds of his footsteps, until he stopped a few feet away from them. Seriously? You're about to be awesome for once and you're making out. The couple laughed and pulled away from each other, grinning at their son. Hiccup tousled his hair playfully. I'm always awesome, Finster. Finn rolled his eyes as he tried to fix his hair. Right, which is why this is the first duel I've ever seen you fight. But it's not my first duel. That one secured your safety so much that I haven't needed to fight again since. Hiccup replied quickly, glancing over his shoulder. Ali was making her way into the academy now. Hopefully I won't be anything short of impressive. He couldn't help but grin at the sight of his only son's hopeful eyes. Quick footsteps echoed down the tunnel and Hiccup knew instantly who it was. Adriana ran forward and wrapped her arms around his middle, squeezing tight. Do you have to do this? Unfortunately I do, baby. He pulled her face up to look in her eyes. I'll be fine. Trust me. Adriana sighed and nodded. Just don't get so hurt that I have to clean you up afterward. Astrid snorted while her daddy slumped. Ye of little faith. He shook his head before quickly pecking Astrid on the lips. All right, let's get this over with. Keep Toothless close. I don't want him mauling the chief of the outcasts. Finn snorted. Yeah, that would be most unfortunate. Hiccup rolled his eyes at his son's already evident knack for dry humor as he exited the tunnel with his sword jingling at the right side of his waist. Ali already stood at the center of the arena with her arms crossed and foot tapping impatiently. About time you showed up. Oh Ali, I was here long before you were. The female chief smirked maliciously. Why? Nervous? No, I just like to come prepared. Astrid stood at the head of the arena and strongly lifted a hand. Hiccup ignored Ali's snide comment about his wife ordering both tribes around and instead focused on his wife's words. The duel will commence promptly. The rules are simple, swords only and the fighter to draw the first blood on his or her opponent wins. Drawing blood through other means other than your sword does not count. My final rule, don't kill each other. This is for opening Thorfist and for sport only. There is no need to spill more blood than necessary. Hiccup bit the inside of his cheek at her words to keep from smiling. She was glaring at Ali so hard right now. But he knew Ali was merely smirking back at her. He didn't even need to look for confirmation. Fighters ready. Hiccup twisted and took a few steps backward, drawing his sword and taking a long, slow breath. Ali's malicious smile returned and he couldn't help but feel the sweat pricking at the back of his neck from her obvious desire to attack him, the multitude of eyes watching, 4 of which belonged to his own children, or the noonday heat, he didn't know. All he knew was the sudden nervousness clawing at his insides. He forced his face placid and calm, tensing as he awaited the gong. Astrid swallowed thickly, adding on a whim, may the best fighter win. Good luck. She saw Spitaloot swung his mallet from the edge of her vision and tensed when the gong sounded across the land. Ali lunged forward first, twirling her sword in her hand for a moment. Hiccup cast aside initial instinct to back away and held his ground, digging his right foot into the ground behind him to stabilize himself. He tensed, patiently waiting for her to reach him. With a horrendous cry, Ali swung her sword at a straight diagonal towards Hiccup's left shoulder. With a sharp jolt, Hiccup dodged her swing and jutted his sword toward her exposed torso. Twisting sharply, she regained her footing and clashed her sword against his with a mighty clang. Hiccup backpedaled toward the center of the arena as her attacks kept coming, one lunge coming close to actually hitting his face. Ali still wore that cursed malicious scowl that seemed all too familiar in this situation, though he couldn't put his finger on where he'd seen it before. He was too occupied to really think about it. In the center of the arena, Hiccup caught her sword against his and tightened his core muscles, stopping her from pushing him backwards any further. Their opposing forces made their arms shake and the villagers around the arena began to cheer for their respective chief. Only one voice got through to Hiccup. "Get her, Dad." "Finn." Hiccup couldn't help the smile that spread across his face as a surge of adrenaline pumped through his veins. He so wanted to make his son proud. Who was he kidding? He had to win this thing, at least for Finn. With an audible grunt, Hiccup shoved Ali back and began to attack her with quick fluid movements. She parried each attack, gradually moving backwards again. She'd lost her footing and that only infuriated her. Ali blocked Hiccup's sword on a particular strike to her left, and while she had the chance, she socked him in the jaw with her fist. Hiccup yelped and withdrew, wrist on his mouth. She grinned and prepared to attack while she had the opening, but Astrid's voice rang above the buzz of the villagers' cheers or boos. "Swords only." Ali glanced over to shoot a short glare at the blonde woman, giving Hiccup time to turn and spit the accumulating blood out of his mouth. "It's a duel, Mrs. Haddock. You do what it takes to win." Hiccup barely had time to register her words until Ali tackled him onto the ground full force. The wind knocked out of him as his back slammed into the cobblestone. Ali poised her sword above him, but he grabbed her wrist and flipped them before she could strike. It was just an opening ceremony duel. Why was she acting like she really wanted to kill him? Ali screamed indignantly with his weight on her and used all her strength to wrestle him back to the ground. He wouldn't give, and they managed to be fighting for the upper hand on their knees, hands holding the wrists with poised weapons. Ali shoved all her weight into her feet, willing her strength to dominate Hiccup's. He felt the cobblestone digging into his sensitive left leg and couldn't help the wince until inspiration hit. Relaxing his muscles all at once and pushing his legs into her stomach, he rolled backwards and threw her over his body onto the cobblestone behind him. He retrieved his dropped weapon as he regained his footing, trying to catch his breath and ignore the pain in his leg. He heard Finn cheering for him nearby amongst the hooligans but forced himself to focus on Ali regaining her footing. A small scrape had appeared on her chin from colliding with the cobblestone, but he forced himself to focus on circling the center of the arena as she did, searching for an opening. Jeers from the outcasts came and encouragements flew from the hooligans, but he ignored them. "Go Daddy!" Adi's voice rang out suddenly, making Ali flinch momentarily. Hiccup lunged forward at that exact moment, quick as the night fury he rode. He nearly jabbed her armpit until she jumped backwards out of reach, swiping their swords against each other in a high-pitched metallic squeak that set everyone's teeth on edge. Ali slid her blade diagonally towards Hiccup's stomach, making him lunge backwards on his left leg. Astrid gritted her teeth when she saw him wince at the movement, his left leg shuddering momentarily. He had no time to recover when Ali swiped her sword back down towards his knees. Hiccup managed a high leap and her sword sailed past. Hiccup blocked her oncoming sword strongly, but what she did next was completely unexpected to everyone, even her own people. Ali kicked his left knee. A sharp cry flew from his throat before he realized it, and he dropped his knee to the ground. Gasps echoed around the arena at the low blow for such a technically minor duel. His sword clanged on the ground, still in his hand but shaking. Flashes of light emerged and he found himself on Braun, hearing the screams of Astrid and Gobber, yelling for him to get up. Dagger poised above him for the final kill. "Daddy!" Adriana screamed, slamming back to the present. Instinctively Hiccup tucked and rolled out of Ali's reach, her sword screeching against the stone. Hiccup stood panting, placing more weight on his right leg than his left. He clamped his jaw as he stepped slowly backwards while she advanced, malicious grin ever present. He knew anyone could tell that he was trying to hide the pain. He almost didn't care, but he didn't want to crack now. Astrid's hand was on Adriana's shoulder. She didn't want to think about the blow that would have landed on him if the girl hadn't screamed. Ali continued to pace after him, a few outcast jeers echoing through the stone. Must be hell to be a cripple. Hiccup's prosthetic scraped to a stop mid-step and his eyes filled with ire deeper than many had seen before. Ali's grin widened, now they were getting somewhere. Must be sicker to take pleasure in issuing low blows. Low blows, weak spots. Ali shrugged. Call it what you will. Hiccup bit back a groan as the pain in his leg spiked through. His sensitive nerves could only take so much and he had already been pushing it as it was. The pain was blinding and he knew he could only last so much longer. If she wasn't going to play fair and if he wanted to win, he'd have to play dirty too, but did he really want to do that in front of his kids? Was it even worth it at this point? The sharp replay of his duel with Dager replayed in his mind, confusing him with reality. He could feel his hands beginning to tremble, but he shook his head in a pretend motion of moving his hair out of his eyes. He knew he wasn't fooling Astrid or Ali. If he didn't focus he could be seriously hurt. He internally sighed when Ali charged again and he bent his knees in anticipation. At the first strike he ground his feet into the stone, forcing himself not to be pushed back. He choked back a sharp whine in his throat at the pain and collected his strength. He pushed back, following up with a few sharp jabs. He came so close to hitting her at this point that he nearly cried out in frustration. He wanted this to be over already. But a sudden kick to his prosthetic, the world shifting down a foot and the second spike of pain through his leg combined with the slip of a cold sword against the side of his jaw made him freeze. He stared up at Ali with mild trepidation and he realized what he looked like at that moment. He was on one knee in front of another chief, a sword pressed to his throat. It almost looked like she was forcing him to pledge fealty, or something. But the silence in the arena aside from the tense growl of Toothless beside Astrid and he finally found his voice. First blood. Just cut me already. Ali's smirk deepened and he seriously wondered at the sword on his neck. She could seriously kill him right now with one stroke. You're giving up. She tensed when Hiccup's sword point poked the inside of her knee. Checkmate. Hiccup growled. Take your petty win or I will take it. Ali had to admit that he looked pretty scary when he was furious. It must be humiliating to lose in front of two tribes. If only she knew how he really felt. That was the least of his worries right now. She tittered lightly and slid her blade thinly along the underside of Hiccup's jaw in such a quick motion that he had no choice but to jerk. Adriana screamed and a few hooligans leaped up angrily at her lithe action. Hiccup felt the blood trickle down his neck, knowing from experience that this cut wasn't even slightly deep. It was just enough to end the fight. He finally stood to his feet, ignoring the jeers from his people and choosing to glare at Ali as she returned her sword to its scabbard and walked out of the arena with swaying hips. Something about that fight threw him off. Why did he get the feeling she didn't mean for it to be just for show, just for opening Thorfist? Why did she fight like she wanted to kill him, just to give him a minor cut that didn't even need stitches? It was confusing and concerning. A hand on his shoulder made him jerk and Astrid held out a hand to him with careful eyes when he raised his sword. He froze and quickly exhaled. He had forgotten to put the weapon away in his deep musings. His hands shook frustratingly as he tried to put the sword away and a shaky exhale escaped him. Astrid tried to help him but he stepped away. He could surely put her own sword back in its place. After struggling for another few seconds he put his sword down and tried to stalk out of the arena. He forced a calm expression on his face as he walked out while his leg threatened to give out with every step. Astrid followed him closely until they were finally in the darkness of the tunnel. Hiccup leaned against the cold wall, exhaling heavily, shakily. Astrid's hands were on his face in an instant. Hiccup. Hiccup. Talk to me, what is it? She knew he was in pain but he was on the verge of a panic attack. She could see it in his eyes and hear it in his rapid breathing. Hiccup, she rasped, shaking his shoulders and trying to keep her voice down. Hiccup blinked and bent over, forearms resting on his knees. He knew he was overreacting, so why couldn't he calm down? He wiped the sweat off his forehead with his hands, watching them in fascination as they shook violently. Astrid's forehead suddenly bumped against his and he looked into her wide blue eyes. Hiccup, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Hiccup swallowed the lump in his throat, but it only grew. When she kicked my leg, I saw Dagger. She blinked in disbelief and he continued, and I heard you and Gobber yelling at me to move. I think I had a flashback. Astrid nodded steadily, turning at the familiar echoing footsteps. She held out a hand to stop her twin children from bombarding their father already. Finn stopped with a look of confusion on his face while Adriana received a more stern expression from her mother. She had to stay put. Hiccup's breathing gradually slowed and he wiped the sweat off his upper lip. Sorry I scared you. No. Astrid pushed his hair out of his eyes just as Gobber made his way down, brushing past the kids. No Hiccup, you're fine. That's normal. Hiccup slowly stood up straight, accepting Gobber's pat on the shoulder. I was so sure I would be completely fine. I didn't expect thr. A strangled cry erupted from his throat and he collapsed, Gobber and Astrid catching him mid-fall. The twins gasped in shock as their father braced himself on the floor for a minute, trying to contain the whimpers and groans coming from his throat of their own volition. Finn felt his face get hot. She should have her foot chopped off for kicking you. That's not fair. Hiccup managed a short laugh. Trust me, buddy. He slowly stood, Finn's eyes widening at how red his dad's face was. Adriana's hands still covered her mouth with wide eyes. Nobody deserves to lose a limb. What are you doing? Gobber asked, grabbing his shoulder when he tried to walk again. I'm going home. Not on that leg, have you lost your mind? Hiccup sighed stubbornly. Gobber. You just collapsed, Hiccup. No. Astrid nearly growled. Finn, where's Toothless? I'll find him. Finn turned and ran out of the tunnel, glad to escape the look of tortured pain on his father's face. That look shouldn't have been there. It should never have been there. Adriana inched forward after Finn left, trying to remain discreet while her parents and Gobber argued. I'm fine, I can make it. All the way to the house. You've really lost your mind this and you didn't even hit your head this time. Gobber knocked a fist against her father's head. Seriously, I'm F. Hiccup tapered off and leaned against the stone wall when his leg shuddered beneath him. F fine. Get Toothless. Finally, someone who's making some sense around here, Gobber huffed. Adriana shuffled past Gobber and reached for Hiccup's hand. He accepted it and barely spared her a glance as he ground his teeth, trying to not cry out loud. Why was he still standing again? If he knew anything from the past, it was that he'd be getting dizzy pretty soon from the pain. Toothless trotted inside without Finn a moment later, sniffing Hiccup up and down for injuries. He wobbled at Hiccup's left knee, making his rider smile. All right bud, let's go home. Chapter 10, The trick started well. Chapter text. Let me see. Astrid. Hold still. Hiccup thought, as Astrid immediately began to work on rolling up his pant leg, that perhaps he shouldn't have put himself in such a vulnerable position. Lying on his back on the couch with his left leg propped up and his right resting beside it allowed his wife easy access. There was also the fact that he was exhausted and honestly didn't have any more fight left. Hiccup. Astrid's eyes widened when his stump was exposed at last. The flesh was bruised and the veins very visibly crisscrossing his skin. It looked more like a slab of meat than a limb. Maybe you shouldn't walk for a while. Not walk? How am I supposed to officiate the Thorfist games? Hiccup grumbled, attempting to sit up to get a better look at his stump. Ali can handle that. She's the one who insisted on the duel. Astrid nodded to Adriana, who pushed Hiccup back down on the cushion. You are going to rest. But what about the slap bet? I have to be there to see Snotlout's face when he loses. Hiccup griped, causing his daughter to giggle. While I certainly understand your motivation, you'll just have to wait. That part of the competition is tomorrow anyway. You are staying on this couch until then. No arguments, Hiccup. Astrid snapped. Finn, go get me a damp cloth. The boy had nearly forgotten that anyone could see him as he stood in the corner watching the events unfold. He hesitated, but Benen's hand on his shoulder managed to snap him to the present. He hurriedly grabbed the cloth and handed it to his mother. "Okay, this is going to hurt," Astrid said apologetically as she removed the prosthetic from her husband's stump. "Kids, maybe you should go." "No." Adriana immediately plopped herself on the ground next to the couch and took her father's hand. Astrid felt like arguing, but she had the distinct impression that her daughter would put up a fight. And she didn't want to attempt to win an argument when she needed to focus on Hiccup. "You know, Finn, perhaps it would be best for us to go." Benen patted Finn's shoulder. "I'm sure your father will be feeling much better this evening." Finn nodded, but it took Benen's gentle prodding to get him moving. As he approached the door, he saw his mother place the cloth on Hiccup's stump. Hiccup hissed in pain. His ragged breathing was easily audible even from outside the house. Finn was furious. And unfortunately for those around him, his temper was as fiery as his hair. As he left the house, Benen at his heels, he decided that Ali the insincere deserved a piece of his mind. And he certainly wasn't about to tell Benen his plan. As much as he adored his mentor, he knew that the elderly man would attempt to talk him out of his plan. And he was no mood to be told that he shouldn't do something he so dearly wanted to do. Astrid cleaned Hiccup's stump as gently as she could. The raw skin caused the cloth to become slightly pink as she rubbed the inflamed areas. He recoiled when the cloth reached a purple area of skin, very nearly jumping off the couch. His teeth gritted together in a desperate attempt not to cry out in front of his daughter, but his hands tightening around hers told her all she needed to know. She gently reached up and placed her other hand atop his, gripping it tightly so that he knew she was there for him. He panted when Astrid had finally stopped cleaning the wound. His wife pursed her lips in an attempt to remain as emotionless as possible. "I'm going to get an ice pack. You're going to need to keep it on your leg to keep the swelling down." "It's okay, Daddy." Adriana patted his hand with the one that wasn't losing circulation. "You'll be fine in no time. Promise?" Hiccup asked, a ghost of a smile crossing his features for a split second. "Yep. But for the next few weeks, you should let Mom duel for you," Adriana said quite softly as Astrid emerged with an ice pack. "I may lose manliness points for saying so, but I think you're onto something, Addy." Hiccup turned to Astrid. "How would you like to be our family's protector from now on?" Astrid turned to Adriana with a smirk on her face. "He says that like I haven't already been protecting our family." "I can hear you," Hiccup drawled. "Sure, my leg is a mess right now, but my ears work just fine." "I'm not so sure. I distinctly remember you having brief moments of deafness whenever Finn or Adri were crying in the middle of the night a few months after they were born." Astrid shook her head, hoping to keep her husband's spirits up with a bit of light-hearted rubbing. "Well, that didn't matter much because you pushed me out of bed anyhow." Hiccup suddenly wailed when Astrid placed the ice pack on his stump with no warning whatsoever. "Why would you do that?" Astrid stood with a satisfactory smile. "What? You were perfectly relaxed and distracted." She shot a wink to Adriana before walking off to get cleaning cloths and some medicine. Hiccup pouted. "I hate you." "No, you don't." Astrid giggled. "Here, I'm going to roll your pant leg up a bit more." As more of the stump came into view, Adriana nearly gaped at all the scars on her father's leg. She knew that he was known as the Dragon Whisperer to some people, and it was clear that those things were true. But how much injury had he gone though to get that title? "Yo-hoo!" Burke to Addy. Adriana blinked at Hiccup's hand, which she hadn't noticed had slipped out of hers, waving in front of her face, and shook her head. "Oh, sorry. Lost in thought, I guess." Hiccup chuckled, still gritting his teeth against the pain. "You just looked like you saw a ghost." Adriana cracked a smile and shrugged. "No offense, Daddy, but your leg looks really gross." "All that?" Hiccup glanced at the scars running up and down his leg. He shrugged. "I've had worse." "I can tell." Adriana agreed, her eyes darting away. Hiccup smiled but said nothing. Astrid shook her head. "Yeah, you've no idea how many times I've had to save him." "Hey now," Hiccup argued. Growing up with him was practically like babysitting. No, it wasn't. Always had to keep an eye on him. Would you stop, leave me alone? Hiccup poked her in the side, ignoring his wife's and daughter's laughter. I wasn't that bad. Astrid grunted. And I'm the queen of the Anglo-Saxons. Oh, come on. You were always at the healers for some injury. At least once a week from the time you were 2 until you were 13. We all remember. Astrid went on, rubbing some medicine on his stump. I'm sorry if I kept business going for her. Hiccup remarked. Adriana chuckled at Astrid's deadpan expression. I think I've done all I can. I need to get back to Thorfist to officiate in your place. Astrid patted his right foot before slipping off his boot. She then handed him his prosthetic. I wouldn't be giving this to you if you didn't need it to walk. She suddenly leaned over his face. But you are only to get up for the outhouse, do you hear me? Yes'm. Hiccup said with a smirk. I see you've assigned me a babysitter in your place, he added, jerking his head toward Adriana. Exactly. You're finally catching on. Astrid winked at him. Make sure he stays in bed, Adri. Maybe you can read him a story. As Astrid walked out of the house, Adriana's head snapped up and her eyes widened. She could do better than reading him a story. Daddy, do you want to hear more of the story I was telling you and Miss Matilda? She asked him, her eyes sparkling with excitement. You know what happens next now. Her father sat up slightly to get a better look at her. Yep. I told Miss Matilda a little more, but I can tell you real quick before I get her. Adriana said enthusiastically. It took a few minutes for the girl to regale her father with the second part of her story. She wasn't as dramatic as she had been when she had told it to Matilda, but she made sure that it was as interesting as possible. When she was finished, she skipped out of the house and headed to the library. Adriana, how lovely to see you today. Matilda chirped when the girl arrived. Are you enjoying Thorfist? Oh yes. Adriana said, heading to one of the shelves. Bits of it, anyway. She paused as she perused the selection of books in front of her. Miss Matilda. Home. Where's the revenge section? What? Matilda leaned against the cart of books she had been pushing and stared at the young girl for several seconds. Well, we don't have a revenge section. Why? Is there a child who is behaving like a bully? Oh, no, not a child exactly. Adriana's brows furrowed as Ali the insincere stupid face swam in her memory. Adriana, are you sure? Do you want to hear the next part of the story? Adriana suddenly exclaimed. Story? Why, Adriana, do you even have to ask? Matilda rushed over to grab the chair upon which she had sat for the first 2 installments. Actually, we're going to have to go to my house. My daddy wants to hear it too. Adriana said, looking slightly guilty. Do you mind? Not in the slightest. I don't think anyone will be here because of Thorfist. Matilda took Adriana's hand. Let's go. The trip back to the house took even less time than the trip from it. Matilda was surprisingly agile for a woman of her age. When they arrived at the house, Matilda sat down on a comfortable chair next to the couch and expectantly waited for Adriana to begin telling the next part of her tale. Slowly, very slowly, the acrobat wrapped her shiny white scarf around her husband's neck. Adriana said dramatically, standing upright and looking at her audience. For luck, my love, she said, kissing him with the gentlest of kisses. Smile, we have done this 1,000 times. But suddenly, she hugged him with the biggest hug in the world, so hard that he thought she would hug all the air out of him. And so, they prepared themselves for the most dangerous feat that had ever been performed. The girl took a step forward. The great escapologist had to escape from the cage. She pretended to break out of a cage as she said this, lean out, catch his wife with one hand. She leaned over and made a fist, grab a bucket of water with the other. She leaned in the other direction and grabbed an invisible bucket, put out the flames on the specially designed dress. Within 12 seconds before the flames reached the fireworms and burned his wife's head off, she threw her arms into the air. Matilda screamed so loudly, the sound echoed off the walls. There was absolute silence for a while as both haddocks turned identical pairs of green eyes to face her. Sorry, go on. Matilda said sheepishly. The trick started well. The moment the specially designed dress was set alight, the acrobat swung into the air. The crowd held their breath as she hurled over the cauldrons and spiky objects. 1 second. 2 seconds. They watched as the flames crept up the dress. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. She began to reach out her arms towards the cage. 5 seconds. 6 seconds. Suddenly, the padlocks pinged open, and the huge chains fell away. 7 seconds. 8 seconds. The door flung open, and the escapologist reached out one huge, muscled arm to catch his wife and their child. 9 seconds. 10 seconds. "Oh, I can't look," cried Matilda, her hands over her eyes. 11 seconds. And he grabbed her hand, and suddenly, the flames were covered in water before they could both be burned to a crisp. Oh, how grand! So the story does have a happy ending after all. Matilda shouted excitedly, her hands in the air. "No," said Adriana stoically. "No?" Matilda asked, sounding quite disappointed. "No." Adriana shook her head. Maybe it was the thought of the child. Maybe it was nerves. But the escapologist used just a touch too much water. And suddenly, their hands became slippy, and she fell. "No. Was she okay?" Matilda asked very quietly. Did she survive?" "She broke every bone in her body. Except for the ones at the ends of her little fingers. She did manage to live long enough to have their child, but the effort was too great." "Love our little girl," she said. "Love our daughter with all your heart. She was all we ever wanted. And then, she died." Adriana put her head down sadly. Matilda stood up and walked toward the table, upon which were a few spare handkerchiefs. She wiped her eyes with one of them. And then, things got worse. Matilda collapsed against the table. "What? Worse?" "Oh no, Adriana, not worse. They can't get worse." "I'm afraid they did," Adriana said emphatically. "You see, the escapologist was so kind that he never, for 1 second, blamed the evil sister for what had happened. So he didn't secure his house tightly enough, thinking that he and his daughter were safe. But one night, the acrobat's sister snuck in and stole the baby, leaving only a cryptic message behind." Adriana paused for a moment to let it sink in. Hiccup's breath caught in his throat. This evil woman was sounding very familiar. The escapologist spent the next few years trying to work out the clue and find the evil sister. And during that time, she hid his daughter away in the woods so that no one would find her. She was nothing but cruel to the little girl, making her wash and iron and cook and clean, and beating her if she did a thing wrong. And so the poor little girl grew up with the meanest, cruelest, horriblest aunt you can possibly imagine. "Addie, are you okay?" Hiccup asked, his face etched with sudden concern. At night, the escapologist's daughter cried herself to sleep alone in her room. Adriana continued as if Hiccup hadn't interrupted. She couldn't say a single word about the evil aunt's bullying because she and the aunt were so separated from other people by the thick wood. And so she suffered in silence. Adriana pulled the back of her shirt over her head once more. This only encouraged the woman to greater cruelties until one day, she exploded. "You are a useless, filthy, nasty little creep." And she beat her and threw her into a dank, dark, dusty cellar, locked the door, and went out. Adriana threw herself onto the ground. There was absolute silence in the house as both Hiccup and Matilda waited for the girl to move again. Hiccup felt as if he was getting awfully close to some kind of realization, but he couldn't quite figure out what it was he was supposed to be gleaning from this story. The girl suddenly looked up at her audience. But that day, the acrobat's sister forgot to check to make sure the door was securely shut. And so the little girl escaped. She was never found by the evil aunt, but no one knows what happened to her. But because she didn't have any memory of her life with the escapologist, she didn't know who she was looking for. So because escapologist didn't know that she had gotten away, he continued to look for her. There was a long silence as Adriana stood in the middle of the room, not moving a muscle. Hiccup and Matilda continued to stare at her, both quite on edge. "Well, what happens next?" Matilda pleaded when the silence became unbearable. "I suppose I'll have to tell you later," Adriana admitted. "And I guess you should go back to the library so it doesn't stay closed." Matilda looked distraught but nodded understandingly. She stood up and took Adriana's hand. I'll be back soon, Daddy. Now remember what Mom said and rest. Adriana leaned forward and kissed her father on the forehead. I'll bring back a book for us to read. I look forward to it. Hiccup said with a smile, secretly glad that she was leaving because it gave him some time to process what he had just heard. Adriana, you are so smart. Matilda said just after they walked out of the house. Your friends must feel so lucky to know you. Oh yes, they do. Adriana said as excitedly as she could as she led Matilda down the path to the library. They're always saying that, in fact, they say Anna, we're so lucky to have a friend like you. So very, very lucky to have a friend as. The girl stopped in her tracks, her eyes fixed on her boots. Matilda stared at her distraught expression for a few seconds before Adriana spoke again. That's not true, Miss Matilda. That's not what they say. The other girls don't like me at all. Nobody does except Mom and Daddy and Eric. And you, I suppose. Matilda paused for a moment to gather her thoughts before speaking. Oh, Adriana. I'm so sorry. It's okay. Adriana picked up her pace so that she would reach the library, thus ending this awkward conversation, much sooner. I'm just different. Always have been. No. Matilda said so firmly, the girl was slightly startled. You're special. It's not everyone who can tell stories as well as you. I can tell just by how you talk to me that you're very smart. And if the other girls don't see that, they're not so smart themselves. But I want them to see that. Adriana sighed deeply. I don't want to be just the chief's daughter who always needs rescuing. But that's how everyone sees me. That's not how I see you. Matilda gently countered. But you're different. You're smart. Matilda smiled when Adriana nodded. Sometimes I think other girls are threatened by people like us. But we can't let that bother us. At this point, they had arrived at the library. Matilda pushed open the door and led Adriana to the middle of the room. There may be nothing you can do to make the other girls like you. But the people who like you because of who you are, those are the people who matter. Adriana bit her lip but nodded. Matilda then, quite suddenly, took a book off the shelf. You and your father liked this story, didn't you? Adriana looked at the cover and smiled. It was the Spaceman book. Yeah, we did. We couldn't put it down. Then keep it. My gift to you. Matilda tucked the book into her arms. But Miss Matilda. I insist. Matilda patted Adriana on the shoulder. Well, thank you. Adriana suddenly filled with tears. Thank you very much. She quickly wiped her eyes but there was no stopping the barrage of tears now falling down her face. Oh, come here, child. Matilda leaned down, put her arms around Adriana. The girl immediately buried her face in her shoulder. I know how much this can hurt. But things do get better. I promise. How? Adriana whimpered. Well, when we grow up, we realize just how silly we acted when we were your age. How stupid our grudges were. Most grown-ups don't treat each other this way. And the ones who do are the ones who don't have any real friends. Matilda gently pushed Adriana away and wiped her tears with the handkerchief she had borrowed from the Haddock home. Chin up. Don't let them get you down. Adriana nodded and stifled a hiccup. I should go home and take care of my daddy. That you should. Matilda patted Adriana on the head once more and smiled fondly as the girl walked out of the library, clutching the book to her chest as if it was the most important object in the universe. Chapter 11, The Next Great Dragon Master. Chapter text. Finn tramped through the village, angry scowl ever present on his face. If any of the older generation had been paying attention, they might have mistaken him for a young stoic the vast when he sneered in the face of danger with contempt. The young man was beyond furious and thus didn't notice his elderly friend following closely behind. Finn was on a mission and couldn't care less who knew about it or stood in his way. That terrible outcast chief caused a lot of pain on his father. His father. How dare she? Oh, how she had crossed a line, and oh, how she would pay for her injustice. She hadn't fought the duel fairly, She had seriously injured his father in front of 2 tribes, and she had made him look weak and helpless in the process. And if there was one thing Finn hated, it was when one person openly subjugated weakness on another. His father was not weak. Hiccup was the strongest man he knew, aside from his Poppy or Benen. These were the strongest men, the leading figures he looked up to for advice and leadership and responsibility. Poppy had given him solid foundational principles such as strength and unbending leadership while protecting those who you care about. His father taught him compassion and kindness and how to be an adroit handler of various situations. And then there was Sweet Benen, who taught him the true definition of strength and power. Criticize any of these men, whether in word or deed, you will face the wrath of fearless Finn Haddock. No questions asked. The headstrong boy saw his target long before she was within earshot. He stomped toward her like a raging bull before halting at her hip with the dust swirling at his ankles. Ali the insincere looked down at him with an air of boredom before raising a critical eyebrow. What do you want? She snipped. You've got some nerve. Finn growled, fists at his sides. He vaguely registered Benen puffing beside him, finally catching up. Ali stuck out her lower lip with creased eyebrows and drawled, "Oh, is this about your daddy?" When Finn's skull deepened, her expression returned to its former icy constitution. Good. I only exposed my tribe to the truth. Finn stood his ground. And what's that? That the hooligan tribe has truly declined from the glory of its former leaders. Hiccup is nothing but a joke, the runt of the village who got lucky enough to become someone powerful because of a stupid flying lizard. Ali ignored the slight gasps from a few hooligans standing nearby and only smiled at Finn's reddening face. He's weak, he's crippled, he can't even control his own children, gives his son a run of the village while his little blonde brat can't even lift a hammer, let alone throw it. The Haddock line has truly deteriorated to nothing, and I am beginning to wonder why the outcasts would ever agree to peace with the hooligan tribe in the first place. Finn saw red. He'd never felt more angry in his entire life, and he couldn't even pinpoint what exactly he was angry at: the degrading comments on his father, his grandfather, his ancestry, his tribe. All he felt was pure rage surging through his veins with each rapid pump of his blood. Nearly panting to keep himself standing where he was, and hiding his flinch under Benen's warm hand, Finn tensed when Ali leaned closer. Just accept the fact that your father is a weak runt who can't be normal, and that you are to clean up his mess when he's finished. I'd start praying to be a better chieftain right now. Finn couldn't hold himself back any longer. He did the first thing that came as instinct. He did what he had always wanted to do to Ratri after he'd yanked him up by the hair and beat him to a bloody pulp with his cane. Finn spat in Ali's face. Gasps flew escaped a few watchers, even Benen. Ali recoiled before raising a hand to slap the boy across the face. A strong hand snatched her hand out of the air before Finn could even flinch. Ali looked down with contempt at the old man tightly holding her wrist. Let go. Ali bit out, wiping the spit off her cheek with her free sleeve. I think not, Benen growled in a deep voice so low and dangerous that none had heard before. The usually very gentle and kind-hearted old man quickly added, I don't care who you are or what he has done to deserve such treatment, do not raise a hand against a child. A foolish child, Ali began. I agree. Finn glanced at Benen with a confused look. Benen didn't return the look, but continued, he has much to learn and he will. You, on the other hand, should not need a lecture from an old man on how not to treat people. Benen's free hand pointed in Ali's face suddenly and she honestly flinched. If you raise a hand against any child in my presence, you would do well to run as fast as you can and find a good hiding spot. Because I will show you what it is like to be truly weak and helpless. Ali's eyes were round as saucers by now, as were most of their audiences, even Finn. Do I make myself clear? Ali swallowed but hardened her expression once more. Her chin bobbed once and Benen released his tight grip from her forearm. Benen next grabbed Finn's arm and pushed him away from the outcast chief, only turning his icy blue gaze away from her when he had no choice but to turn. The outcast chief sneered at the hooligans who had been watching, ignoring their smug expressions or comments thrown in her direction. With a scowl, she stomped through the square toward her living quarters. She could still feel the hard grip of calloused, scarred fingers pressing into her arm. Benen dragged Finn toward the outskirts of the village. The farther they walked, The more Finn took into account the silence, the firm grip the man had on his arm and the decreasing number of villagers the farther away they walked. As soon as Binnen seemed content with their distance from all civilization amongst the trees, he released Finn's arm and whirled on him. "Foolish boy." Finn jerked at Binnen's words. He wasn't harsh and he wasn't loud. He was firm, quiet, and an uncharacteristic frown was splayed across his face. Finn had no words to speak, he was so shocked, and Binnen continued, "Would you like to start a war between the tribes? Every chieftain has his or her pressure points and limitations. I suspect that if one were to push them far enough, the repercussions could be disastrous. Your parents don't need to worry about." Finn finally found his voice. "A war?" "Binnen," I spat in her face, "that wouldn't start a." "You'd like to think so, wouldn't you?" Binnen interrupted, folding his arms. "Do you know how to run a village? Do you know the proper way to address a chieftain, other than your father? Do you know just how far the chief of the outcasts can be pushed? If that scene was any indication, I'd say she doesn't take spit to the face lightly. And quite honestly, I don't blame her. It's degrading. She deserved it." Finn shouted, his former ire returning in waves within his soul. Binnen leaned back on his left leg patiently, waiting for the boy to continue. Finn's hands waved around in angry circles as he struggled for the words. "As she said the biggest lies about my dad. He isn't weak and helpless. He is a great chief and a great man. If anyone is weak, it's her. She cheated in that duel and made my dad look stupid in front of everyone." Finn kicked an idle rock away from them, panting as it crashed further into the woods. "How can you be so calm about this? Why am I getting in trouble?" Binnen listened calmly, and Finn was glad that the old man's temper was swift but quickly spent. Finn felt the heat on his face, from anger or honest embarrassment he couldn't tell. Binnen's blue stare prompted him to further explain himself. I just. My dad's not weak. And I can't stand anyone treating him like he is." "You are afraid for him?" Binnen quietly replied. Finn's head snapped up at the offensive word. Binnen regarded him silently. "Fear is not always bad, Finn." Finn looked away, trying and failing to hide his disagreement. Binnen pressed on, "You don't want to see him hurt. You don't want to see him in pain." Binnen paused, weighing his words heavily, trying to decide if he should speak them. "Because of what you went through." Finn looked up at him with hard blue eyes. He hated it when anyone broached the topic of his slavery. It was easier with Binnen because he had been a slave for much, much longer. But to speak of Finn's worst days, his weakest days, he shook his head to clear it. "What's your point? You've tasted fear and the inability to stand up for yourself. Hey, look at me." Binnen waited until Finn looked back at him. It took nearly a minute and the boy looked quite pained. Binnen so wished to take that burden away from the boy. It clearly still hurt more than he'd ever let on. And the thought of anyone else, especially someone you love, having to go through something similar kills you inside. "I understand, lad. I do." Finn nodded absently, his eyes darting back to the tips of his boots. "You are right. Your father is not weak. Or helpless. And neither are you." Finn glanced up at him through his bangs. A wide smile had spread across Binnen's wrinkled face. "Your father has seen indescribable struggle and pain in his life, just as we have. But all of us have experienced different kinds. You should ask him about it sometime. Really, he is a lot stronger than most people give him credit for." Ali the insincere is exactly what her title says, insincere. Your father knows not to take insincere words to heart. It's the words of those who matter that really matter. The last line stuck in Finn's mind for a few seconds. He pondered them for a moment before nodding in agreement. Binnen was right. He was always right. "But back to you and your actions." Binnen shifted his weight back to both legs with his lips pursed and eyebrows raised. Finn nodded and scuffed the toe of his boot in the dirt. "It doesn't matter who wrongs you or those you love. There is a proper way to confront an enemy. Ali's an enemy now." The question popped out of Finn's mouth before he remembered thinking it. He glanced around the trees sheepishly. Binnen sighed patiently. "In general, someone who wrongs you would be labeled an enemy, yes. Finn nodded in understanding. Right then. Let's think about it this way. You stomp on one of Adriana's hair flowers. Is it all right for her to throw your favorite dagger into the ocean as repayment? No. Finn scowled. Then if a woman treats someone you love with contempt, is it all right to spit in her face? Finn's scowl deepened. No. Why? Finn thought about it. I guess because I'm not any better if I degrade her like that. Exactly. Benen nodded. Her actions were inexcusable, but you can't change her. You can only confront her. But if you can't change her, then what's the point? Sometimes there isn't a point, if you can't change them. So let her get away with what she did. Finn asked incredulously. Benen smiled patiently. My father once told me that silence is acceptance. Simply telling someone that what they did is wrong is enough. They won't necessarily change, but if the one time you brought to their attention that you did not appreciate what they did and that person did change, wasn't it worth it to speak up that one time? Finn blinked before slowly nodding. The concept was becoming clear. He couldn't change everybody. He couldn't change most people, in fact. But simply putting his opinion out there wasn't a bad thing at all. His responsibility could only be in his methods of confrontation. So Benen interrupted his pondering silence. What did we learn today? That spitting people in the face is not the right way to confront people. Benen raised an eyebrow at the smirking boy. Anything else? Finn shrugged. Just that you are probably the best teacher ever. Benen chuckled and slung an arm over the boy's shoulders, leading him back toward the village. You still have much to learn, fearless Finn. But you will be a great chief one day. I'd stake my life on it. No need for drastic measures. Finn nudged the man in the ribs with his elbow. Cheeky boy. Benen pinched Finn's cheek. Ow. Finn squirmed out of his hold while Benen laughed. One last thing. Benen placed his hands on Finn's shoulders and looked him in the eye. Don't be afraid of pain. Your mother and sister may need a man's assistance now and then with your father. If something was to happen and he can't walk again, you have to be willing to help at all costs. Was the kick that serious? Benen shook his head. No, I think he'll be fine. But the point still stands, don't be afraid to help your family when they are physically hurt. It's not the same as on Meiro. Finn tried to keep his face from drooping in melancholy. Instead he nodded in reply. Yeah, I should see if Mom needs me to pick up any eggs or something. You never know what we might need, I guess. Good lad. Benen smiled as the boy trudged back to the village in silence, twigs cracking under his boots. Oh, Benen. Finn whirled around suddenly. Thanks. Benen smiled broadly at the boy's back. He knew deep in his soul that one day fearless Finn Haddock would be a good man, just like his father and grandfather before him. But he could only hope and pray that in his long journey to get there, Finn would have more pain and more struggle. It wouldn't be fun, easy or the young man's idea of learning, but if Benen knew anything, it was that great men were forged in fire and it was the privilege of lesser men to light the flame. Finn observed his father from across the square with a pensive expression, not paying attention to how he chewed on his finger in nervousness. Hiccup had finally left the house a little after lunchtime. Finn had come downstairs for breakfast early, as he always did, and sure enough, his father was still asleep on the couch. His mother had insisted that he sleep on the couch instead of walk on his leg up the stairs. Hiccup argued that their bed was more comfortable. They squabbled. Mom won. Mom always won. As Finn ate his porridge, he had ambled through the living room and watched his father sleep. He had always thought his father's hair looked funny in the morning, a puffy auburn mop that only an early morning flight could tame. Finn tensed when his dad mumbled something irritably and turned over, his stump peeking out of one corner of his blanket. Naturally, Finn's eyes were glued to it. He'd never really thought much about his father's missing leg, it had been gone for longer than he'd been around after all. It was normal and natural to see. But seeing Ali kick it and seeing him in so much pain yesterday, it kind of hit home. It couldn't be easy to lose a limb. A lot of older folk like Gobber had some missing limbs, a living testament of the old age of dragon and Viking wars. Finn suddenly realized his father was one of the youngest in the village to have a missing limb. It was a rarity to find someone younger than that. The deep scars turned white with time became more apparent the longer he stared. The boy looked down at his own leg and pondered the mental image of a metal and wooden contraption in place of a foot. He wiggled his toes expertly, wondering what it was like not to have them. He wondered if his dad thought about it much. Did he miss his toes? Finn had scoffed at that thought when his mother emerged from the upstairs, eyeing him critically. The boy smiled sheepishly, finished his porridge and gave Astrid a swift kiss on the cheek before leaving the house. Now, at nearly 3 in the afternoon, his father was talking to Gobber and Horst in the square about some important chiefly things. Finn couldn't help but notice every shift of his father's weight onto his right leg, every minor shudder through the shortened left limb. And his father's every attempt at covering the wince that would cross his face. Finn had to hand it to him, his father was handling it well. He was sure that over 15 years of living with 3.5 limbs gave you lots of experience in handling the pain and pressure. His father didn't seem to be too upset overall, or even concerned at what others might think of him showing pain. He'd held himself together in the arena as he'd left, but now he didn't care. Again, Benin was right, maybe his father really only cared about the opinions of those who really mattered. Finn huffed in boredom, watching as Eric hefted a roll of new leather inside his shop. He wondered if the guy ever got bored making saddles all day. Though he supposed if he had, he'd probably have quit by now. Standing from his seat perched on an upturned wooden crate, Finn waltzed through the hustle and bustle of people. The games wouldn't start for another few hours and the daily practice with the coaches had ended an hour ago. His sister seemed to have been banned but he pretended this didn't bother him. Tornado was taking a snooze before the games commenced, so flying was out. None of his friends were doing anything interesting. Thor forbid he ask Adriana what she was doing right now, she was probably picking new flowers in the fields instead of practicing her axe lifting. Finn walked toward the sloped wooden gangplank that led toward the docks. He paused in confusion when he saw a group of outcast boys hauling in a net from a small boat. Apparently they'd gone fishing. A small aquafluorescent blue mass struggled within the net and the group of boys seemed to be having some fun with it. Finn's eyes narrowed as he jogged down the descent to investigate. When he arrived, he pushed past a few boys and gasped. A baby squadron had wrapped itself tight among the netting and only struggled and twisted with squeaks of terror while the boys laughed on. One boy had a stick and even poked it in the side. Finn's instinctive love for dragons took over and he shoved the boy back. "Hey, stop that. You'll hurt it." Slowly getting on his knees, he held a hand out toward the shaking creature. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you. Oh, the son of the Dragon Master is going to make friends with the mighty sea monster. Show us your powers, oh great one." The boy with the stick mocked. Most of the boys laughed, the few who didn't watched in wonder. Finn gritted his teeth but forced himself to not retaliate and focus on the dragon instead. He remembered his father telling him that squadrons grew to be massive creatures when they reached adulthood. They could spray boiling water at their targets with great precision and were quite venomous. That was one of his favorite stories his father told him as a little boy. The squadron hissed and tried to move away from his hand. "It's okay, here, I'm going to help you, see." The young dragon watched with narrowed eyes as the redhead pulled the net off its tail. Finn carefully allowed the creature to sniff his hand before it warbled happily. In seconds the dragon hopped toward him as best it could and allowed him to pull the rest of the netting away. The outcast boys gaped when the baby squadron hopped into his lap and nuzzles his face. Finn laughed, scooping the creature up in his arms. "You're a nice little guy, aren't you?" "Yes you are." The dragon purred when he scratched under its chin. "Okay. I didn't see that coming." The boy tossed his stick into the water and looked at Finn sheepishly. "Sorry." Finn frowned. "Don't tell me sorry. Tell him you're sorry." The squadron hissed at him in response and the boy jumped. "Dragons are amazing creatures. You shouldn't catch them and then torture them." "Oh, he got caught accidentally." The boy sputtered. "Honest, we didn't mean to catch him." "But you still didn't let him go." Finn muttered, standing up with the dragon in his arms. "I'm going to take him to my dad and ask what we should do with him. I'd feel bad just dumping him back into the water." Without waiting for a response, he walked back down the docks to find his father. From above, Gobber leaned against the railing with an impressed look. Interrupting Hiccup and Horst's conversation, he crowed, "Well, would ya look at that? Looks like your boy is the next legendary dragon whisperer." Hiccup and Horst also leaned over the rail to look at Finn making his way toward the ascending wooden rails. The chief's eyebrows rose when he realized the small dragon he held was not a terror, but a baby Scaldron. A very young baby Scaldron, possibly only a few days hatched. "Here now, what's that?" a fellow villager piped from down the rails. Hiccup pulled his eyes away from his son to follow the villager's pointed finger. He looked back down toward the water, not far from Finn, and tensed at the ripples below the surface. "What is that?" Gobber asked in wonder. Hiccup's eyes widened when the waters began to churn. "Finn! Finn!" Hiccup sprinted down the rails, ignoring the pain in his leg as he went. He could see his son just reaching the bottom of the rails, he could see the baby dragon watching the water beside it with excited squeaks, he could hear Finn trying to calm the dragon down. "Finn! Put it down!" Finn's eyes snapped up a moment too late. "What?" Water shot upwards in a giant wave beside the dock, dousing Finn and Hiccup. The villagers of both tribes crowded along the rails above in shock. The group of outcast boys cried out in fear, huddled in a group at the end of the dock. Hiccup skidded to a stop halfway to the bottom, his prosthetic slipping on the wet wood. He slid a few feet and managed to stop, his eyes never leaving the sight of his only son staring an angry mother Scaldron full in the face. Her wings flared outward, her lips peeled back in a sneer of rage. The baby Scaldron chirped up at her in greeting and the mother huffed at it angrily. The pup shrank in Finn's arms, fully admonished. Finn's eyes were wide with amazement but mostly fear. He knew Scaldrons were big, but this thing was massive. She was easily 30 feet tall and 50 feet long. "Finn!" Hiccup gently called and her great head swung to him instantly. Hiccup held out his hand and tucked his head low, baring his neck openly to show her dominance. The great creature huffed at him dismissively after a minute and slowly swung her head back to face the young man holding her pup. Hiccup gently tried again. "Finn, you have to give him back." Finn gulped. "No duh." Hiccup licked his lips. "Buddy, listen to me very carefully, okay? I want you to maintain eye contact but get down on your knees." Finn wanted to object but obeyed, the knees of his pants slick against the wood. "Now very, very slowly, put the baby on the deck in front of you." Finn moved to bend his head. "Keep eye contact. Don't look away from her. That's it. Easy." The baby Scaldron sat in front of Finn's knees, looking between Finn and its mother. Raising its head, the baby barked at its mother once. She huffed at the pup, jerking her head downwards. The baby licked Finn's face quickly before diving into the water. He popped back up beside his mother a few moments later. But the mother didn't move. She continued to stare at Finn intensely, so he gulped again. "Dad. Now what?" Hiccup watched the Scaldron curiously, trying to figure out why she hadn't left yet. "She's trying to figure you out. Is that a good thing?" or the Scaldron jerked her head higher, the water splashing around her as she jerked. Finn's eyes widened when she seemed to inhale deeply. Hiccup gasped, expecting the worst. "Finn." The Scaldron snapped her great neck toward Finn and roared fully in his face, the great sound sending ripples through the water and echoing across the lands. Finn ground his teeth together and tensed under the great sound, his hair blown back against his scalp. When the sound finally died out after what seemed like an eternity, his ears rang and he blinked dazedly. The first thing he saw was his father standing 10 feet away, shaking in fear and white-faced. Then he felt a slick, slimy wet tongue swipe across his left cheek. He felt his thick red hair slick up on one side and he made a face. He stared up at the Scaldron with disgust. "You're welcome." The dragon chortled and bumped her massive nose against his chest, nearly flinging him onto his back. Finn gasped and gently rested his now very small hand against her nose, staring up at her eyes in amazement. "Wow!" he breathed. The familiar step thunk of his father's footsteps pulled them out of their staring contest of wonder. Dragon and boy looked over at Hiccup, who was staring at Finn with a look of pride, though he still looked a little shaken. The dragon leaned her head toward him and he patted her nose. She sniffed him, then jerked her head at Finn, a low moan resonating in her long neck. Hiccup smiled. Yep, he looked back at Finn. He's mine. Thank you for sparing him. The mother huffed her thanks, blowing Hiccup's hair backwards as her baby leaped back onto the deck to douse Finn with dragon kisses. The mother moaned warningly while Hiccup laughed. Footsteps echoed down the plank and Hiccup turned around. Astrid slowly approached, her face full of wonder and worry. He could make out Adriana staring at the scene with wide eyes just behind her. He held up a hand to signal her to stay back. The Squadron took one look at Finn's approaching mother and understood the sentiment. Rumbling low in her throat, she called her young back to the water. Finn sighed, petting the Squadron in his lap. Well, I didn't expect to make a new friend today. Come back sometime, okay? The pup squeaked and licked his face again. Finn wiped his face when the dragon dove back into the ocean. The mother again blew hot air into his face before she turned and disappeared back into the deep. The claps of all the watching villagers resounded from above, but a pair of strong arms engulfed Finn before he could look. At first he thought it was his mother, but the embrace was in fact from his father. Finn, you scared me to death. Hiccup murmured into his hair. Finn's face fell, again surprised by his father's emotion in so little time. I'm fine, Dad. Really? Hiccup stood up, ruffling his hair. Oh, I know. You almost didn't need me. I probably would have been eaten if you hadn't come. Gah. Moo. The boy cried from within his mother's tight embrace. Fearless Finn Haddock, don't you ever do something like that again. Do you want to give me grey hair and wrinkles? Astrid scolded. You'd still be beautiful, so why would it matter? Hiccup guffawed and Astrid pulled Finn back with narrowed eyes. Hiccup, we have spawned an evil genius. Hiccup laughed harder at Finn's disgusted face. Please don't ever use that term in front of me again. Finn huffed. Astrid rolled her eyes. Seriously though? Do not do that again. Finn sighed exasperatedly. I'm fine. Good. Come on then, let's get you cleaned up before the games. Astrid walked Finn back up the plank by his shoulders. Before following, Hiccup turned toward the small group of outcast boys walking forward and warily watching the water. He crossed his arms and frowned. I trust you boys have learned your lesson then. All of them nodded, the oldest boy piping, yes sir. Good. If she had come to you instead of Finn, I don't think things would have gone very well. The boys nodded in agreement and Hiccup waved them toward the village with a small smile. Hiccup looked out at the ocean for a moment, mostly to give his leg a few moments of peace. He couldn't help but laugh a little at the past 10 minutes, Finn had to have some kind of adventure every day. Although Finn was exactly like his mother in almost every way, the boy probably didn't realize that he had a knack for troublemaking like his father. Chapter 12, I'm here. Chapter text. Hiccup limped up to his wife and children, trying his best not to wince when his stump seared in pain with each step. Finn and Adriana's eyes had been on him almost non-stop since the duel. He couldn't show weakness in front of them. The outcasts didn't matter in the slightest, but the last thing he wanted to do was give his children any reason to doubt that he was capable of protecting his family. Corey and Rosabella, the girls Snotlout and Hiccup had bet on a few days previously, had tied in the games so far. Corey won all the strength-based games, but Rosabella was much more talented with her dragon. The final part of the competition included both kinds of games, so it was a fairly even match. There was no telling who would win. When Hiccup signaled for them to start, the Vikings in the stands tensely watched both girls as they got themselves through each section. I don't know why you're bothering to watch. Snotlout said from behind the hooligan chief just as he sat down. Corey's already ahead. Sure, but it's like I said, Rosabella is going to catch up. You just watch. I've never seen anyone so stealthy in my life, and that's including the terrible terror Astrid trained all those years ago. Hiccup said, a smirk on his face. I can't believe you remember that far back. Astrid muttered to him, causing him to chuckle. I always remember your achievements. Hiccup winked at her and kissed her on the cheek. You. Finn crinkled his nose in disgust. How are you so cool and so gross at the same time? It's not gross. It's romantic. Adriana retorted irritably. Now hush and watch the game. You're not my mom. Finn protested. No, but she's right. Don't ruin the game for everyone. Cheer on Rosabella if you want to make noise. Hiccup patted his son's shoulder. Oh great, brainwash your kid into cheering for the person you want to win. Snotlout crossed his arms. And why not? You afraid she'll win if enough people cheer for her? Hiccup laughed at his friend's skull. A little less sure of yourself, aren't you? I'm perfectly sure of myself. Snotlout grumbled. Tell him, Inga. He nudged the young girl at his side. Her dark hair spun around in an instant as she turned up to face him. Tell him Corey's going to win. Inga, who hadn't been paying any attention whatsoever to her father's argument, gave him a blank stare. Corey's the bigger one, right? Yes, Corey's the bigger one. I thought you knew this. Snotlout rounded on her. Are you not paying attention? Sorry, Daddy. It's more fun to play than to watch. Inga shrugged. Why are you suddenly being so cranky? You weren't like this when we were playing with our dolls. Your dolls? Snotlout exclaimed, his face reddening. But I thought you liked Barbie. We'll talk about this later. Snotlout said over Hiccup's guffaws. And I'm not being cranky, he huffed. I just thought you liked Thorfist as much as me. As much as all the Jorgensens. I just like to win. Inga said amiably before leaning forward and engaging Finn in conversation. Well, it's nice to know she inherited that aspect of the Jorgensen spirit. Snotlout mumbled. You get what you get. Your kids were never going to be little versions of you. Thor help us all if they were. Hiccup chortled. It'd be a bigger disaster if your kids were both exactly like you. Snotlout glanced at Adriana, who had apparently decided that the game wasn't exciting enough to keep her attention and had her nose in the Spaceman book. Well, more like you than they already are. Look. The girls just got to their dragons. Astrid piped up. Corey's losing her lead. What? Snotlout shouted, raising his head so that he could see over Hiccup's. Not possible. Well. Rosabella's just getting lucky. Is she? Hiccup watched her flight through narrowed eyes. Better start preparing yourself for a hearty slap. You prepare yourself. Corey is still winning. Snotlout pointed to the girl in front just before Rosabella suddenly went out of sight. Looks like your champion is throwing the race. Give her some more credit. Hiccup put up a hand. The race isn't over yet. Corey came around the last bend, hurtling toward the finish line. Snotlout leaned forward so much, his chin bumped up against the back of Hiccup's head. Finally the girl crossed the line. It sounded more like a thunder drum had roared behind the hooligan chief's head than his friend cheering. I knew it. Snotlout howled gleefully. Ha ha, I win. Before Hiccup could react, a massive hand came out of seemingly nowhere and knocked him in the direction of his daughter. Adriana barely had time to get out of the way before her father's weight came crashing down where she had just been sitting. Hiccup groaned in pain as he sat up, a red, hand-shaped mark forming on his face. A confused scowl joined it moments later. Why would you do that? He whined as the children around him tittered nervously. I won the slap bet. Snotlout exclaimed almost maniacally. In your face. Yes, I can feel it in my face, thank you. Hiccup growled, his hand caressing the angry red mark. That was awesome. Tough Nut guffawed from a few seats over. I've only ever seen handprints like that on Ruff's face. Snotlout, you just got so much cooler. Yeah, you gotta show me how to do that next time Tough does something stupid. Rough Nut added, looking at her friend in awe. It's all in the shoulders. Snotlout flexed his muscles. Daddy, look. Adriana quickly stood up and pointed to the ring. Quite suddenly, Rosabella appeared from the other end of the arena, a triumphant smirk on her face. It took several seconds for the hooligans to figure out that she had, apparently, managed to find a shortcut and had flown in well before Corey had arrived, hiding herself so deftly, no one had noticed her. Hiccup's injured face broke into a smile. Snotlout's, on the other hand, fell dramatically. No, he said in horror. No. Oh yes. Hiccup grinned. I told you she was stealthy. No. She cheated. Snotlout wailed. I demand a rematch. She won fair and square. Hiccup chortled. Which means I won the slap bet. And yet a slap occurred without the permission of the slap bet commissioner. Tough Nut patted Adriana on the shoulder. Which means you have penalty slaps to distribute. Snotlout suddenly hid behind his daughter. You wouldn't hit an innocent little girl. Daddy, what are you doing? Inga asked, raising an eyebrow. You said Jorgensens never retreat and never surrender. I say a lot of things. Snotlout said dismissively. Be merciful, Anna. For hitting my daddy. Adriana rolled her eyes and thought about this for a moment, a tiny smile flitting across her face. I'm going to give you a choice. Either 8 slaps all in a row right now or 4 slaps that can be distributed at any point in time from now to eternity. You, good one. Tough Nut exclaimed excitedly. You should take the 8 now. No way, why take 8 when you can get only 4? Astrid asked, speaking up at last. Because the constant fear that at any moment you could get slapped in the face, that would drive you crazy. Rough Nut explained. I'd know, growing up with him. She smacked her brother on the shoulder. I'm going to go with the 4 for eternity. Snotlout said after a moment's consideration. Good call, said Astrid, winking at Hiccup. Horrible call. Rough Nut and Tough Nut said in unison. Hiccup suddenly leaned back to stretch his muscles before he had to stand up. Snotlout visibly flinched. Hey, relax. I'm just stretching, man, take it easy. Hiccup gently brushed a bit of dirt off of Snotlout's shoulder, causing the Jorgensen to flinch more. This is going to be fun. Without giving Snotlout a chance to retort, Hiccup stood up, hiding his pained wince, and sauntered forward to congratulate Rosabella and give her the Thorfist medal. Snotlout crossed his arms and scowled. It's okay, Daddy. Inga said, putting her arms around one of his and leaning against his shoulder. At least it wasn't 5 slaps. Yes, thank you. Snotlout's lips twitched, but he didn't let the smile cross his face. I guess things could be worse. And I'll still love you even if Mr. Hiccup leaves a red handprint on your face forever, the girl continued. Heather breathed a laugh and gently stroked her husband's cheek. And you're always saying that battle scars bring honor. Yeah, yeah. Snotlout said rather loudly over Astrid's laughter, which she hastily turned into a coughing fit. Rub it in. Oh, we will. Astrid choked out. Don't you worry about that. The excitement of Thorfist seemed to wash over Adriana like waves over a seashell dug deeply into the sand. She knew everyone else was affected, but she was far too interested in whatever was running through her mind to pay much attention. Not that paying attention to anyone was ever a strength of hers. She never much liked listening to people talk about silly things like axe throwing and statistics on who would win or, well, anything like that. So she was quite relieved when the day's games were over, because it gave her much more quiet, and more quiet meant more reading. However, the Haddock girl's first mistake that day was in choosing to read underneath a nice big tree on the outskirts of the village. Her other mistake was to allow her dragon to go flying off without her for a bit. This left her rather vulnerable. She didn't notice this, probably because she was reading about a man from space with a time machine that was bigger on the inside. If he and his companions were safe from the monsters of the universe, she felt safe from the outside world. Unfortunately, what she was reading was so engrossing, she didn't notice the giggling growing louder or the fact that she was surrounded by the other girls from her group, minus Tarin. However, her keen eyes noticed the change in lighting and she looked up. What are you doing? She asked, a knot forming in her stomach. Watching you read. Gillian said, crossing her arms. What does it look like we're doing? Why? Adriana raised an eyebrow. It's weird. Dana suddenly snatched the book out of Adriana's hands and flipped it in front of her face. It doesn't even have any pictures. It doesn't need pictures. Adriana retorted, reaching up for the book, which Dana held out of her reach. You're supposed to use your imagination. Why would you read about cool stuff when you could just do cool stuff? Morgan asked with a chortle. It's so stupid. Why learn to read if you're not going to read? Adriana remarked dryly. Duh, you have to read so you know what the laws are or how to do stuff books tell you to do. Dana rolled her eyes. Not just silly fairy tales. Storybooks tell you how to do different kinds of things like how to live your life. Adriana stood up and tried to grab the book from Donna, who hopped back a few steps. Once you can read, you can have every adventure you ever dreamed of. You can go to a school to learn magic or fly away in a box that's bigger on the inside. In those pages, there are no limits to where you can go, who you can be. No one will ever tell you you're too young to save the day because it happens right here where it's safe. The girl gritted her teeth at the amused expression on Donna's face in response to her words. Please give me my book. No way, I think I'm going to take your advice. Donna giggled, opening the book in the middle and grasping one of the pages. No. Donna, don't. Adriana wailed. It's the only storybook I own. I think I'll save this page for later. Donna laughed and ripped it out of the book, crumpling it and sending it fluttering to the ground. This one too. The red-headed girl began tearing page after page from the book, the other girl's guffaws echoing in Adriana's ears. The haddock girl rushed at Donna, but the other girl was too quick for her. She tossed the book to Morgan, who ripped out a few more pages, finally tossing it to Gillian when Adriana got too close. Around the circle it went until the ground was littered with pages. Tears began to form under Adriana's eyelids, but she blinked and kept them at bay. There, now it's worth reading. Donna chortled along with the other girls. Maybe you can use all the magic you learned to put it back together. I could just glue it. Adriana mumbled, bending down and picking up the crumpled pages. Yeah, you should. And while you're at it, why don't you stick your stupid book to your stupid head? Gillian shrieked with laughter as she and the other girls finally retreated. As Adriana picked up the pages of her book, a single warm tear made its way down her face and dropped onto her lap. She sniffled and wiped it away as she finally collected all the pages, hugging them to her chest as she walked back home, her head down so that no one would be able to see several more tears trickle down her cheeks. When she got home, she was relieved to find herself alone in the house. She pounded up the stairs to her room, accidentally kicking one of Finn's practice axes into her room as she did so, and gingerly placed the papers and the covers of the book on her desk. Then she turned and threw herself, face first, onto her bed. She raised her fist and angrily pounded it on the pillow once, twice, thrice, and then raised her head, eyes glazing over slightly as the final part of her story suddenly popped into her head. One day while he was on a foreign island, the escapologist received word that a young girl had gone missing and that a note had been left in her place. Consumed with rage that the evil sister had taken another victim, he immediately flew to the island on a borrowed dragon. He couldn't find the sister's hiding place until dusk. When he finally touched down next to the sister's hut, he could hear the cries of a little girl. Adriana suddenly got out of bed and grabbed Mr. Gobcup from her nightstand. Though it had been years since he had seen his little girl, he couldn't help but hope that she was the one he was hearing. She rushed up to her bedroom door and slammed her hands against it. And so he smashed the door open. She took a few steps back and allowed the door to open in her imagination before continuing, now getting down on her knees. He looked into the face of the little girl and for a moment, he saw his own little girl. The same sad, lonely gaze. But it wasn't her. However, the escapologist just happened to look enough like that little girl's father that it wasn't until he was quite close that she realized he wasn't the man she thought he was. She looked into Mr. Gobcup's face, disappointment suddenly washing over her. She bit her lip for a moment before continuing. Overcome with compassion for the little who had been kidnapped and for her worried parents, the escapologist tried to open the cage in which she was kept. "Don't cry, little girl," he said as he opened it. "I won't let anything happen to you. You have nothing to fear and nothing can hurt you. I'm here," he assured her. Adriana held up Mr. Gobcup and stared into his eyes, a flash of anger piercing her soul. But as the escapologist tried to open the lock on the cage, an almighty rage grew inside of his great heart. This demon. This villain. This monster. Bullying children is her game, is it? Well, let us see what this creature thinks she can do when the wrath of a grown man stands before her. Adriana suddenly dropped Mr. Gobcup to the ground and grasped the practice axe. With a shriek, she brought it down on the doll. Its leather jacket split in half as she continuously pounded it. She stopped, taking deep breaths through gritted teeth, and looked up at the wall, almost like she was looking at an invisible audience. But that was the last anyone ever saw of the escapologist. Because he never came home. Ever again. The spell now broken, Adriana looked down at her doll, and her insides froze. Inside the leather jacket was the back of the doll, which was now exposed. Except it wasn't white like it had been before. A dark brown stain covered its back. And only one substance could leave a stain like that. The little girl quickly snatched the doll from the ground and immediately thought back to when this blood could have gotten on the doll underneath the leather suit. Suddenly, it hit her. Hadn't her father made the doll an outfit for one of her birthdays? A sudden desperation to find her father overwhelmed her. She needed an explanation. Grabbing Mr. Gobcup by the hook, she rushed out of her room and pounded back down the stairs. With each step, more memories flooded her brain. It had been days before she had gotten Mr. Gobcup back and her father had sewn the outfit on him so that she couldn't take it off without a lot of effort. The blue nightie the doll used to wear had disappeared. And this all happened when her father had been so hurt, he had nearly died. She finally found Hiccup limping up to the house and leaning on Toothless. He smiled as she approached. "Hey, Addie, did you want to read a bit more of?" "Addie, what are you?" Hiccup looked down at his daughter, who immediately unbuckled his flight suit when she got to him. Then he noticed Mr. Gobcup in her hands, the brown blood stain quite visible on its back. "Addie, tell me what's going on. Why is there blood on my doll?" Adriana asked, her eyes wide with fear. How did it get there? Is it yours?" "Addie." Hiccup gently took her hands in his and pushed them away. "Let me show you." He opened his flight suit and pulled down the neck of his shirt to reveal the nasty scar over his heart. Adriana let out a gasp and put her hands over her mouth. "Do you remember when I had to leave to fight Dager? When I said I might not come back?" he asked softly. Adriana nodded. "You put Mr. Gobcup over my heart. I took him into battle that way." Sensing where this was going, Adriana took a step back, overwhelmed with emotion. Hiccup leaned forward and gently grasped one of her shoulders. "Dager tried to kill me so many times. But he couldn't." He tugged Mr. Gobcup from her fingers and placed it over the scar. Tears spilled out of the girl's eyes. "He saved you." Hiccup let the doll slip out of his fingers and land on the ground. He grasped his daughter's shoulders and pulled her in for a hug. He could feel her shaking in his arms. "You saved me, Addie," he whispered. "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to think about how close I came to dying that day. That's why you wouldn't let me see your scars." Adriana whimpered into his shoulder. Did you kill him, Daddy? Did you kill Dager?" Hiccup hesitated before sighing deeply. "Yes, Addie. I did." He gently pushed her back by the shoulders. "I didn't want to. And it very nearly ruined everything a few years ago. That's what you were having nightmares about." Adriana wiped a few tears with the back of her hand, but there was no keeping up with the wave of fresh tears that quickly followed them. "Yes." Hiccup reached up and attempted to wipe still more tears away with his thumbs. "I had to protect you. That's all that mattered in the end. I barely survived, Addie. He almost killed me." He smiled and shook his head. "But I couldn't leave my baby. I had to see her again. I had to be there for her no matter what." "So you killed someone?" Adriana sniffled loudly. "Listen to me." Hiccup looked his daughter in the eye. "Life is sacred and to take it is a horrible thing. But if I hadn't taken that one life, if I hadn't done that heinous, disgusting thing, I assure you that not only would I have died but so would you and everyone we love. I can't always protect my people the way I want. But it's my job as chief." Hiccup reached up and brushed his daughter's bangs from in front of her eyes. "A chief protects his own. And so does a parent." Adriana remained silent for a few seconds, processing the words she had just heard. Hiccup drew her into his arms again, holding her tightly. "Don't cry, Addie. Please don't cry," he whispered into her ear. "Nothing can hurt you, baby. You've nothing to fear. I'm here." Chapter 13, The Games Begin. Chapter text. Morgan Sigmund thought the award ceremony for the older Thorfist competitors was a waste of time, and she wasn't afraid to sigh loudly and poke her mother in the hopes that she would allow the family to leave early. Morgan's mother, however, was a proper Viking, and proper Vikings believe that their community is their extended family. For that reason, she wasn't too keen on being interrupted while cheering on members of her community. Pipe down, she snapped at the girl after a few seconds. The other girls are sitting still, why aren't you? I'm bored. Morgan whined. I don't even know Rosabella, she added as she watched Hiccup present the older girl with the medal. Please let me go home. None of the other girls are wiggling around like you. Morgan's mother chided. Adriana's as calm as can be. Now sit still. Perfect, Adriana. Morgan muttered darkly. It was a funny thing about grown-ups, the fact that they really liked comparing their children to each other. Morgan hated being told to act like another child, and she especially hated it when she overheard her parents talk proudly about a well-behaved child. It was like she didn't even exist at all. At least until someone needed a good lecture. Then there was nowhere she could go to escape. Taryn was good company when she felt neglected, but the girl had no backbone at all. It was better than being perfect all the time. Every other day, it seemed that some grown-up was telling her to be more mature, more quiet, more polite like the chief's daughter. And that is why Morgan Sigmund detested Adriana Haddock with every fiber of her being. Of course Adriana didn't know this. It was fun to watch her struggle to fit in, all the while knowing that she wouldn't succeed. It was even more fun to intentionally snub her and watch that brain, the one everyone praised for its intelligence, whir away inside her head and come up with nothing. Taryn, on the other hand, only went along with this because Morgan was quite popular with the other girls and no one wanted to be outside the popular group. Least of all someone who should have some amount of respect as part of the chief's clan. But Adriana was so weird that it wasn't hard at all to exclude her. And Taryn was average in just about every way, so she didn't bring the group down at all. Morgan stared down a few rows at the girl in question, watching as she sighed deeply when Jacobi was awarded the Thorfist medal. Honestly, sometimes it seemed like she was 100 miles away, but now, she appeared to be quite focused. She had a silly-looking blue flower in her hair today, different from her usual purple ones, and it was so exposed that Morgan considered snatching it and seeing how long it would take for the Haddock girl to notice. Probably not long. She was sitting next to the leather shop boy Eric. Morgan didn't know Eric very well, but his association with the enemy, in addition to the fact that he was almost as spacey as her, made him almost as bad. And he wasn't the type of boy to snitch, but he was the type to get all self-righteous about right and wrong and demand the flower back. And then Morgan's mother would get involved and it meant another lecture. So stealing the flower was out of the question. Now that she was eyeing Eric, she noticed something very strange. The boy wasn't at all focused on the ceremony. His eyes seemed to be constantly shifting to Adriana, drinking in her appearance and even marveling at the way those blonde locks glistened in the sun. Eric, Morgan realized, was smitten with the girl. It wasn't unexpected. She had heard adults joke about planning their wedding quite often, but it was a bit out of the blue. How long had this lasted? And, more importantly, was there something she could do about it? The ceremony suddenly ended. Morgan had been focused on Eric for so long, she hadn't noticed the time passing, and it was her exasperated mother poking her in the back and telling her to get up that reminded her of her earlier impatience. Like I said, it was boring, she said as she waited to walk across the bridge. Well, at least you were quiet for a time. Morgan's mother replied irritably. And you will behave in the next ceremony or I will think about taking you out of Thorfist for good. Oh no, Morgan thought with a smirk, she's thinking again. I'm trembling in my boots. Morgan's mother talked about all kinds of punishments but never delivered on them. It was something Morgan liked quite a bit because it meant that she could get away with anything as long as she didn't mind sitting through the lectures, which could be quite lengthy. A red-haired girl finally caught up with her and grabbed her arm. Morgan jumped and turned to look at her. Dana looked annoyed about something, but Morgan got the feeling that she wasn't about to find out. We have to talk, Dana said solemnly. Now. All right already. Morgan followed her away from the crowd. What's so important? My mom's an idiot, that's what. Dana growled. What did she do? Morgan asked, genuinely bewildered. She decided to move here. Dana sighed deeply before continuing. She wants a fresh start after Dad died. Or something like that. I don't know. Looks like I'll be stuck here. Well, that's not so bad. You and I get along. Morgan reminded her. Dana rolled her eyes. I just don't want to. Why am I telling you? I don't even know you. Morgan shrugged. You came to me. As Dana stomped off, looking very upset, Morgan couldn't help but think that things were about to get better. Taryn was so very dull, but a girl her age who was so much like her, if not a bit more fiery, would make a good ally. Or a friend. Whichever worked best. The morning of the first day of the Thorfist Games, at least for Finn and Adriana's age range, was a flurry of activity. The games would take place that afternoon, but there was a lot of last-minute training. Everyone was excited about that day. Everyone, that is, except for Adriana. But she feigned it as she descended the staircase on the way to breakfast. As usual, she was up a bit later than the rest of the family, but this was partially because she put work into her appearance. She had braided her long blonde hair so that, when she turned her back, one might confuse her for a younger Astrid. Hiccup suddenly felt very nostalgic. The girl's father and brother sat at the table while her mother stood in the kitchen. Quietly, she slid into her seat at the table and began to eat, her eyes focused on her food. I think I can beat the other boys at the events. Finn stood up from his seat. I mean, I've practiced and trained. He sat back down. And I didn't think they were that hard. But then again, I guess I could slip up once more. He raised to his feet. But only if someone else tripped me, which would be against the rules. He returned to his seat. And Tornado has experience flying with other dragons, so the dragon events won't be much of a problem. The boy stood back up. I can tell you're excited, buddy. Hiccup dove his spoon into the bowl and looked up at his smiling son. But if you don't eat your breakfast, you're going to run out of energy and then you won't win. Finn sighed in exasperation and leaned over his bowl to eat, not bothering to sit back down. Hiccup breathed a laugh at his son's enthusiasm. The boy really was quite fun to watch when he was excited about something. Okay, champ, maybe you should stay seated. Hiccup stated, shaking his head in amusement as his son obeyed. He then turned to his daughter. You're being quiet this morning. You okay? Huh. Adriana dropped her spoon in the bowl with a clatter, spilling its contents on the placemat. She grabbed a towel to clean it up, quite used to her and her father's clumsiness by now. I'm fine. Just a little nervous. I don't know what events they've got planned this year. Shouldn't be too difficult. There's the archery, the log roll, and a new one I'm not allowed to tell you about. But it's a little dangerous, so be sure to wear a helmet. Hiccup tapped the girl on the head. You'll be just fine. Adriana wished she could be reassured, but it was rather difficult when hundreds of eyes would be fixed on her in a matter of hours. The last training session before the games was required, so Adriana and Lily walked to the arena as inconspicuously as they could, though with a monstrous nightmare, being inconspicuous wasn't easy. Adriana sat down and shut her eyes, blocking out all noise. And then it came over her again, just as it had last time. Quiet. Not silence exactly, but a warm, comfortable feeling of complete serenity. She'd found her weapon against the girls who mocked her and the trainer who periodically glared at her. Rather than fight, she could just relax. The one drawback to this was the fact that she heard absolutely none of the lesson. And it was most unfortunate for her that the information presented was life-saving and thus vitally important. Then again, the glares and whispered insults were also ignored, so there was a bright side to this, at least until the actual competition. The girls competed first in the Thorfist Games, followed by the boys. Finn felt incredibly antsy and disliked waiting for the girls to finish, so he paced around the stands. Meanwhile, Hiccup watched as they rolled out the log and set it up. He didn't like the idea of his daughter attempting to stay on it, but the ground had a few mats for those Vikings lucky enough to land on them. Safety on Burke was never much of a concern. The first thing Adriana thought as she stood atop the log waiting for it to start rolling was that she should have stayed in bed. There was no second thought, because the moment the log began to roll, she lost her footing and was the first to be thrown off. This was no surprise to anyone since she was clumsy on the best of days, but it was quite embarrassing nonetheless. Gobber checked to make sure she hadn't been knocked out and then steered her to the nearby benches so she could watch the rest of the girls. Feeling slightly dazed, Adriana watched as Taryn fell, bringing Gillian down with her. Only Donna and Morgan remained, so the Haddock girl quickly lost interest. In fact, she was so wrapped up in her inner world that she hadn't noticed when one of the girls finally fell off and the game had a winner. Nor did she even notice who it was that won. The boys' competition was quite a bit more exciting. Finn and the other boys stayed atop the log for nearly a minute before two outcast boys fell, soon followed by Cliff. It was Finn, Thorin, and a third outcast boy, whose name Adriana didn't know, who remained. The outcast soon fell as well. Now it was Finn and Thorin. "Go Finn," called a person from the crowd whose voice neither Finn nor Adriana recognized. "You can do it, Thorin," called Thorin's fans. There was a bit of an argument between the groups of people supporting each boy. Adriana enjoyed watching the verbal tussle, shaking her head at the stupidity of it all. By the time she turned back to the log, only one boy remained. Thorin's fans cheered loudly as the log stopped rolling and Finn stumbled to the bench. "I can still win this," he said confidently to anyone who would listen. Setup for the next event was a lot quicker. Adriana was good at archery, and now that Tari wasn't in charge, she was permitted to shoot left-handed, which felt much more natural. The girls lined up and Adriana had the enormous misfortune to end up between Donna and Gillian. "You're doing it wrong," Gillian muttered to her. "No, I'm not." Adriana smirked the tiniest bit. This was something she could win. "Yes you are," Donna repeated just as they were given permission to shoot. "Can't you do anything right?" Adriana knew that Donna's words shouldn't pierce her the way they did. She knew that Donna didn't matter at all. But it's one thing to know things in your head and another thing entirely to know them in your heart. And Adriana's heart began to pound with suppressed anger. Unfortunately for her, her anger also made her arms shake. And that is how Adriana missed the target by a fraction of an inch. Morgan hit it dead center and smiled triumphantly as Hiccup declared her the winner. Finn wasn't as good at archery as his sister, but he was proficient and the other boys were terrible. The moment they heard the signal, 6 arrows pierced the air and only 3 even landed on their targets. Finn's arrow was closest to the center and Hiccup beamed as he declared his son the winner. Only one more task remained. It took a long time to set up, but since the 10-year-olds weren't allowed to leave the arena, it was a very boring 20 or 30 minutes. Loud roars punctuated their conversations and made them wonder what on earth they could be setting up. "All right," Gobber announced, standing in front of what appeared to be some sort of maze. "A hammer has been placed in the middle of the maze. Whoever finds it first wins. However, there are more than a few obstacles. Now you were taught all about how to deal with them in training this morning, so I don't think they should be a problem." He looked pointedly at Adriana when he said this, only increasing the girl's nervousness. Fantastic, thought Adriana as she positioned herself at the entrance, the one lesson I should have been listening to and I ignore it completely. Gobber signaled for them to enter the maze and the 6 girls immediately did so. Hiccup watched the spectacle from the highest seat in the arena next to Ali the Insincere. The woman looked almost bored with her chin on her hand and her eyes inspecting her nails instead of the competition. Hiccup felt a surge of frustration but quashed it. His little girl was about to make him proud. The obstacles, of course, were dragons. Crowds of wild terrible terrors, wild nadders and gronkles and one monstrous nightmare. The girls all knew exactly how to deal with all of them, so he wasn't as worried as he might have been. He should have been more worried. He watched his daughter rush through, first running into the swarm of terrors. Quick as a flash, his clever little girl distracted them with a shiny light and kept on going. He felt a surge of pride for the tiniest moment. She could win this. Adriana was the closest to the hammer in the center of the maze when a gigantic gronkle suddenly got in her way. The yellow beast didn't look anywhere near as friendly as Meatlug, so she suspected belly rubs would be out of the question. It snarled at her, its body ready to pounce. Hiccup tensed. Surely his daughter knew what to do. He had made certain that she and the other kids had been told what to do if they ran into a wild gronkle. The first thing you should do if you run across a wild gronkle is to avert your eyes. Some dragons are more likely to trust you if you look them in the eye. The changeling and the Gronkle are the two known exceptions. The second thing you should do is to move away from it very slowly. To train a Gronkle, you have to show that you're not a threat. Younger Gronkles tend to be more suspicious than older ones, and this one was quite young. Hiccup knew Adriana knew all this. She had been in training that morning. She was perfectly safe. But then she did something that made his heart stop pounding entirely. Keeping eye contact, she inched forward and put out her hand. The snarling elevated in volume. "Addie, no," Hiccup muttered. It was almost like she was emulating her brother's actions with the Scaldron a few days previously. Back away, back away. Most unfortunately for everyone, especially boys, girls cannot read minds. The Haddock girl had no idea her father was attempting to tell her not to do exactly what she was doing. And so Hiccup watched as she crept closer and closer. And then the Gronkle's hindquarters began to wiggle. "Stop the games!" Hiccup called, standing up and frantically waving his arms. It was too late. The Gronkle pounced in the direction of the only daughter of Hiccup and Astrid and very nearly flattened her. Fortunately, she had sensed its hostility and jumped back just in time. But it wasn't quite done with her yet. Firing lava blasts from its great mouth, it pursued the child, narrowly missing on several occasions and singing the girl's hair. Adriana threw both her hands over her head and ran as fast as she could, her helmet flying off her head and landing behind her. Hiccup ran at full speed toward the entrance to the arena. He knew he couldn't simply jump down, not with an injured leg. His heart pounded in his chest, his paternal instincts taking over his entire being. The only thing that mattered was saving the life of his child. Suddenly, an agonizing pain swept through his entire left leg and it shuddered horribly. Hiccup howled in anger as he fell sideways, now completely unable to support his weight. And if he couldn't support his weight, there was no way he could get to his little girl in time. Unfortunately for his daughter, his genes won out over Astrid's. Instead of nimbly hopping over a stray axe handle that someone who had been setting up the maze had accidentally left behind, Adriana's foot fell on it and she lost her balance when it rolled out from under her. The Gronkle leaped at her as her head hit the pavement with a sickening crack. Chapter 14, What Matters? Chapter text. Addie. The anguished and terrified cry of a father in distress was haunting to all that heard it, young and old. There were horrified shouts all over the crowd, but that sound seemed to permeate everyone's eardrums. His eyes watering with the pain, Hiccup tried to get back up but simply couldn't place any weight on his stump. He could do nothing except drag himself, which hurt almost as much but was at least doable. Fortunately for him, Rough Nut and Tough Nut, who were running up to check on the girl's condition as well, seized the father under the arms and yanked him up, supporting him between the two of them so that he could get down there as fast as possible. But they soon stopped because something quite surprising happened. The dragons weren't with their riders in the stands because they were simply too big to all fit. They perched atop cliffs above the arena or flew around. Several didn't even bother to come. But Lily didn't want to miss her rider's activity, so she had been watching from far above. When the Gronkle began to pursue the little girl she so liked, it seemed like every ounce of gentleness drained out of her in an instant, leaving only raw power coupled with fury at the hostile dragon. Quick as a flash, she dived toward the arena. And if she had been even 1 millisecond later, her rider's life would have prematurely ended right there. The large dragon crashed into the Gronkle, attempting to rip it to pieces with her teeth and claws. It howled in pain, and one of the most intense dragon fights anyone had ever seen, at least between two trainable breeds, broke out. Lily considered igniting, but her rider was a bit too close and she knew that the human's skin wasn't as fireproof as hers. The humans stood outside the maze, which was beginning to collapse. The other girl's dragons swooped down and retrieved them before all the walls crashed to the ground with a loud racket, leaving only the dragon fight and the tiny girl visible in the wreckage. Miraculously, nothing had fallen on Adriana, so there was no fear of further injury. Assuming she was still alive, of course. Ordinarily, the Thorsten twins would have adored the sight of the dragons ripping into each other, but both were rather fond of the Haddock girl and her personal safety trumped their enjoyment of the spectacle. Hiccup tried to pull them forward, but his weight on their shoulders made the going slower than any of them would have liked. Meanwhile, Astrid was enlisting all the dragons she could call to help pull Lily and the Gronkle off of each other. Stray blasts of fire flew everywhere. One nearly set Hiccup's hair on fire, another landed mere inches from Adriana's left hand. And quite a few made it all the way to the spectators outside the arena, igniting Horst's sleeve. The man quickly extinguished the flame with a canteen he kept on his belt, but he would later have to be treated for the burn on his arm. Within seconds, Toothless, Stormfly, Tornado, Hookfang, Meatlug, and Charger all came pelting downwards toward the scene. Toothless arrived first, just in time to dive in front of a lava blast from the Gronkle. Yet again, Adriana escaped certain death by inches. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said for Toothless' prosthetic tail, which immediately caught fire and was completely destroyed. Hiccup's heart, which had stopped beating entirely when his daughter was in the path of said lava blast, began to pound in his ears. He tried to pull himself from Rough Nut and Tough Nut, but both hung on to him as tightly as they could. "Let go of me," he bellowed. "I have to get to Addie." "No." Rough Nut tightened her hold on his arm a bit more, a tiny spark of maternal instinct taking over her brain. "You could get killed." Charger's behavior was the most surprising of all the enlisted dragons. Eric watched in horror as his Nada began to join Lily in the fight against the Gronkle. While the other dragons focused on pulling the two dragons apart, Charger seemed to want to protect his rider's friend almost as much as Lily. Eric took off toward the arena to stop his dragon from killing the other or hurting Adriana in the process. Hiccup had never felt more useless. Supported by his friends, he watched helplessly as the dragons all fought to protect his child. He desperately wanted to rush over and check to make sure his little girl was even alive. But when he looked over at her, his heart dropped into his stomach. Adriana lay still on the pavement. She was on her stomach, her forehead resting on the ground and a tiny pool of blood slowly growing under it. Hiccup desperately prayed to every god he could think of to spare his daughter's life. If he failed to save her, if she died that day, he would never forgive himself. "Addie!" He whimpered so quietly, even he didn't hear it. Finally, the dragons had stopped the fight. Gobba rushed forward and shooed the Gronkle away. It flew away, bleeding from several cuts on its back but otherwise unharmed. Lily let out an ear-splitting roar as if to warn the Gronkle that if it decided to return, they would resume their fight. As the dragons were calming down the enraged monstrous nightmare and deadly Nada, Hiccup suddenly had a burst of adrenaline. He pushed himself away from Rough Nut and Tough Nut and hobbled as fast as he could toward his child. He was just behind Astrid and both fell to their knees next to their daughter's body. Hiccup took her in his arms. "No, no, 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 come on, Addie," he whispered, holding her head close to his chest as Astrid checked her pulse. Though it only took several seconds, Astrid's search for a pulse seemed to last an eternity. An eerie hush fell over the crowd. Those who knew the Haddocks best held their breath, praying that they wouldn't be burying the child well before her time. Eric trembled, his eyes wide, his heart drumming in his ears. Finn was rigid, teeth gritted together and his stomach in knots. Astrid let out a shaky sigh. "I have a pulse," she breathed through it. Hiccup couldn't quite smile, but relief swept through him and he relaxed considerably, holding his little girl closer and stroking her hair. His hand was soon wet with her blood, which, as it turned out, had been trickling from a cut on her eyebrow. He used his sleeve to try to wipe it from her face. At the sight of the girl's parents relaxing and Astrid's small smile, there was a collective sigh of relief in the crowd. Finn's once rigid form suddenly became so shaky he collapsed on the nearest bench. Binnen walked up behind him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Eric reacted similarly, falling to the bench and putting his head in his hand, feeling light-headed all of a sudden. Olaf wheeled himself next to his son and placed an arm around him, rubbing his shoulder reassuringly. "It's all right, son," he whispered. "She's okay." Had anyone been paying attention to the sea of faces in the crowd, they might have noticed that one face fell in disappointment and scowled at the family. "The Haddocks have more lives than a cat," the person muttered before putting on a fake smile and pretending to be as relieved as everyone else. Fishlegs soon approached, getting on his knees next to the relieved parents. "We need to get her to a healer. I'll carry her, if you need it." Hiccup hated his leg more than ever now. He didn't want to let his daughter go. But he nodded and handed her to his friend, who gently lifted her into his arms and began to carry her out of the arena. Rough Nut and Tough Nut helped Hiccup back up so that he could follow. Well, that was exciting. Ali drawled from the entrance, a horrible smirk on her face as she watched the procession. We'll be talking about this for years. Finn glared at her, his lips pursed and a plethora of angry retorts rising in his throat. But Binnen was at his side and gently squeezed his shoulder. The boy choked them down. What, no snide remarks? I don't want to waste my time. Finn snapped before turning from her and walking slightly faster, Binnen beaming with pride behind him. The first thing Adriana felt when she regained consciousness was a splitting headache. Her eyelids twitched a bit before opening, revealing dim blurs all around her. How had she gotten here? Her brain got to work trying to remember what had happened, and then it all came back. For a moment, she felt paralyzing fear. But then, unless she was in Valhalla, she didn't remember the maze being this dim. Hey there, sleepyhead, came a voice to her left. I was starting to wonder if you'd ever wake up. She blinked several times to clear her vision and found herself face to face with Eric. Lily and Charger were relaxing behind him, both brightening at the sight of the girl, alert and obviously not permanently damaged. What time is it? Adriana asked, sitting up a bit and putting a hand to her head. About 10:30, came a voice to her right. Adriana turned and took in the sight of her father lying on the bed next to hers, his leg wrapped up in enough bandages to hold several ice packs in place. You were out for a long time. She turned back to Eric. Did Thorfist continue? Yeah. They decided to change the maze into a dragon race and Finn won for the boys according to your mom, who was in about an hour ago to check on you. Eric explained. She's with Ali filling in for your dad. Why are you here? Adriana turned back to her father. Apparently attempting to put weight on an injury is a bad idea. Hiccup deadpanned. When you went down, I tried to run in and save you but my leg couldn't take it. Oh, the girl paused for a moment to let this sink in. I'm sorry, Daddy. No, it was my fault. I should have listened to everyone who warned me that this could happen. Hiccup waved a hand. And now after the outcasts leave, I get to pass on the majority of my duties to your mother. She's going to be so thrilled. Astrid was Hiccup's second in command and she took over as chief whenever he was too sick or needed to be in several places at once. She had never covered for him for a long period of time and Hiccup felt slightly guilty at the thought of just how worn out she would be with all the things expected of her. But attempting to do everything on crutches was a recipe for disaster considering his propensity for clumsiness. Once Thorfist was over, he was probably going to have to take it easy for a few weeks. But if it meant making sure his daughter healed up as she was supposed to, it was worth the boredom. There was a silence in which everyone, dragons included, relaxed a bit in relief now that they knew Hiccup and Adriana were on the road to recovery. Then Adriana realized something that made her sit up and whirl her head around to face him, regretting it instantly when her head throbbed. But you were supposed to compete next, she exclaimed. After my age group, how did it go? I don't know. I didn't show up. Eric shrugged nonchalantly. I didn't want to go and wonder if you'd be okay. I'd probably get myself killed because I wouldn't pay attention to what was going on. But, all the training. I don't care about that. Eric rolled his eyes. I wasn't very good at it anyway. It was a waste of time. Your dad and I have been catching up for the last few hours. He's got some funny stories. Oh no. Adriana's mouth dropped open. What did you tell him? Nothing embarrassing. Mostly stories about Finn. Like when he and Toothless got covered in mud and then got it all over me. Oh. Adriana didn't remember that day very well. Listen, Eric, Addie's okay now and your family is probably going to want you home soon. Hiccup smiled in a friendly sort of way. You can come back in the morning but I think we all need to get some rest. Well, more rest. Charger needs to get back to the egg anyway. I left Oudsnadder with it and he's probably going to want a break soon. Eric got up and beckoned for his dragon to follow. Charger looked a bit disappointed about being separated from Lily, who he seemed to like quite a lot now that they had fought together. However, his loyalty to his young one out and he followed his human out of the healer's house. The moment he and Eric were out of earshot, Hiccup turned to his daughter, who was looking back at him sheepishly. Adriana Miracle Haddock, what in Thor's name were you thinking, he growled, catching her off guard with his sudden fierceness. You are lucky to be alive. Why didn't you go to training? Never in her memory had her father ever been this angry with her. He had shouted at her a few times, which she didn't like, but this quiet anger was even more intimidating and it made her a bit shaky. She averted his gaze. I did go, she said quietly. I just didn't listen. And why didn't you listen? You know full well that the information in those training sessions are vitally important. Hiccup's voice remained quite intimidating. Adriana's mouth was open and the words about the bullying and the cruelty and the general unpleasantness of her experiences in training and even outside it were traveling up her throat, but they got stuck somewhere. She stopped, completely bewildered as to why she wasn't spilling everything she was thinking right then and there and getting the hugs and assurances that this would be taken care of that she was used to getting after statements like these. And then something clicked. She didn't want to tell him. She wanted to. But she simply couldn't. As she sat there, a peculiar feeling washed over her, one she certainly wouldn't have been able to place before this incident. She didn't want her father to know about what happened because a very big part of her didn't believe that he could fix anything. He had made promises before, certainly, but had broken just about all of them. So now it was up to her to fix her own problems, to learn to cope with the world without relying on her parents. In short, she didn't trust him at all anymore. And for a moment, this terrified her. It just wasn't very interesting. Adriana lied. I'm sorry, Daddy. But she really didn't feel very sorry. How else was she supposed to handle all the nastiness around her if she didn't shut it all out? She was sorry that she had caused such a commotion, but she was mostly angry. Angry because if she wasn't so weird, she would have listened to the instructions and may have won that part of the competition. Angry because the only reason she was so weird in the first place was because of her fears and coping mechanisms. And for some reason, that anger was directed toward her father. She didn't quite know why that was, but she would have plenty of time to think about it. Hiccup, unaware that his daughter had made a stunning revelation, continued his tirade, telling her that she had to listen to those in authority and that her near-death experience would hopefully teach her a lesson. His anger was quickly spent, however, and he sat back in the bed against the pillows for several minutes before speaking again. How's your head? He asked. Achy. Adriana replied unemotionally. I think I'll be okay. Good. Hiccup said, sounding a little relieved. We were all so terrified that you were seriously hurt. Please don't scare us all like that again. I won't. Adriana promised, secretly telling herself that this was a promise she would definitely keep. She would go on to break this promise so many times, it was laughable that those words ever escaped her mouth. The next day, Adriana felt well enough to take a walk outside the healer's house. The herbs Mara, the new healer, had given her were quite potent and eradicated most of the pain in her head. But all things considered, she hadn't hit it very hard at all, so she was expected to recover very quickly. Eric decided to join her and the two of them strolled all the way out to Troll Bridge, which was well outside of the limitations Mara had set, but neither of them cared very much and it wasn't like she would catch them anyway. Adriana was very quiet on the walk over and, once she was seated on the bridge and dangling her legs over the water, put her chin in her hands and looked very unhappy. What's wrong? Eric asked, breaking the increasingly uncomfortable silence. I can't win anything. Adriana mumbled. I try but I can't. Neither can I, said Eric nonchalantly. Why does this matter now? Because nobody likes me and I thought. Adriana stopped speaking and stared into the murky water below her. It doesn't matter. You thought they would if you won. Eric sighed deeply. Annie, it sometimes surprises me how someone as smart as you can be so thick. What? The girl's head snapped upward and throbbed painfully. How am I thick? Annie, if they didn't like you before Thorfist, why would they like you after it? Eric explained as if talking to a toddler. Because then I'd be a winner. But you'd still be you. Eric rolled his eyes. And even if they did like you afterward, they wouldn't be your real friends. They wouldn't like you, they'd like what you can do. Adriana considered this a moment. Still would have been nice to win. Annie, you shouldn't have to prove yourself. Eric turned to look at her. Real friends don't care about what you can do. They care about you as a person. He smiled a bit. You know I'm right. Yes. I mean I don't like you because you can win Thorfist or anything like that. Eric leaned back on his palms and looked up at the sky, which was a vibrant blue with little clouds traveling lazily across it. I like you because you're really smart, even if you don't think so. And he looked her for a moment. Other reasons. He cleared his throat. And I didn't win Thorfist. I never would have even if I'd competed. You know I'm terrible at that stuff. Adriana mimicked his pose and looked at him, taking in his small frame and skinny arms. Okay, yeah. Probably not. And you wouldn't like me any better if I did. Eric added thoughtfully. I'd be proud of you. Adriana admitted. But no, I wouldn't like you more. Told you I was right. Eric nudged his best friend on the arm. Yeah, shut up, Blondie. Adriana retorted with a mischievous smile. Blondie? Eric cried indignantly. Oh. What? You're blonde. Adriana winked at him. Why can't I draw attention to it? Because it's a silly name, that's why. Eric exclaimed. Then I think I'll keep it. Adriana ruffled his hair. Besides, it's cute. Don't you call me that in public. Eric narrowed his eyes at her. Oh, but that takes all the fun out of it. Adriana giggled. Fun for you, maybe. I've got a reputation to uphold. Eric flexed his invisible muscles. You're going to make everyone think I'm not strong and manly. Since when are you ever that? You don't know what's going to happen. Maybe puberty will transform me into a buff, muscular, manly man. Adriana snickered. Yeah. Sure. I'll believe it when I see it. You hurt me with your lack of faith. Eric feigned offense, his hand over his heart. It's okay. Manly men aren't emotional. You'll get over it. Adriana lightly punched him on the shoulder. What do you know about manly men? You're a girl. Eric lightly punched her back. I'm a Viking. I know what they look like. Adriana stuck out her tongue. And if you're so buff, why are you sitting here talking to a girl instead of competing in Thorfist and showing off your muscles? Eric paused before chuckling to himself. You got me there. It's okay, Blondie. I'll still be your friend even if you're the smallest, skinniest Viking in the world. I mean, you just said that's what real friends do. Adriana looked at him and smiled, her eyes now a lot brighter than they had been over the last few weeks. Using my own words against me now. Eric smiled back at her. I told you you were smart. Adriana tossed her head so her bangs flew out of her eyes. Well, maybe I did need the reminder. She suddenly threw her arms around him, catching him by surprise. Thank you for being my friend. Eric hugged her back, hoping that she couldn't hear his heart pounding loudly against his ribcage. You're welcome, he said awkwardly. Suddenly it didn't matter what those stupid girls had said. Adriana had a friend right there and she wasn't about to take him for granted. Of all the people who had been in her life consistently, he had never let her down. Now that was true friendship. Chapter 15, New Beginnings. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Adriana wasn't at all surprised when Finn narrowly defeated Thorin to become Thorfist champion. It wasn't his first win, after all, but it had happened in front of the outcast tribe as well as the hooligans, so it was quite impressive. She was well enough to see his victory, but she decided she didn't want to subject herself to name-calling, so she stayed out of the way. Naturally, Finn didn't care. When the kerfuffle of the Thorfist games was over for the day, Eric, Olaf, Adriana, Hiccup, and Fishlegs could all be found in Charger's pen. Fishlegs had hypothesized that the egg would hatch quite soon and none of them wanted to miss it. They had already prepared for its hatching by removing the bones from several fish and putting them out for the baby. It wasn't an ideal first meal, but they had failed in their mission to find Charger a mate. He looked a bit forlorn as a result. Lily comfortingly cooed at him, but he didn't respond. I really hope she makes it, Eric said at last, breaking the silence. You think the fish will be enough for her? We haven't tried it before, Eric. Hiccup sighed deeply. We're just going to have to hope for the best. Besides, she's related to Charger and he's a fighter. He patted the dragon on the back. I know. Eric gently stroked his dragon as they waited. I think she'd be better off if she had a mom too. Adriana looked almost depressed. She had so wanted Eric to find Charger a mate but had been so preoccupied with Thorfist that she hadn't even helped him look. And now the baby Nada had no mother at all. What if she didn't survive without the proper food? Quite suddenly, the egg began to rattle a bit. Charger sprang to action at once, pushing it into the water-filled hole they had dug, and the 5 humans and dragons, which crowded the pen so much the other dragons had to look in through makeshift windows and toothless through the ceiling, watched the egg eagerly. Adriana and Eric were the most excited of all. Unlike the adults in the room, they had never seen a dragon egg hatch. They wanted to lean in and watch closely, but everything they had ever heard about dragon eggs told them that this was unbelievably stupid, not to mention dangerous. Splash! A turquoise blur came shooting out of the water and landed right in front of Charger. The baby dragon uncurled her body and looked around at everyone who had been watching. She made a tiny noise in her throat. Oh! Adriana squealed. She's so cute. That was certainly an accurate description. The baby Nada had big eyes, a bright turquoise body, and a kind of manic energy. She hopped around her father, making little squeaking noises. Even the grown men were melting at the sight of this tiny dragon. Charger leaned down and put his snout right up against the newborn's. She licked it enthusiastically. He licked her back, causing her to drip with dragon saliva. The baby didn't seem to mind, instead she hopped underneath the bigger Nada's legs and affectionately rubbed them. Adriana had her hands on her mouth and tiny, delighted squealing noises emanated from her throat almost of their own volition. Fish Legs, however, seemed excited for an entirely different reason. My hypothesis was correct, he exclaimed. You can tell the gender of an unborn dragon by studying the egg. You've tried this before? Hiccup asked, eyebrow raised. On a few of Meatlugs. But apparently it's universal. Fish Legs took out the dragon book, which still looked almost brand new, and jotted down some notes. This is the best day ever. I wonder if dragons can tell what a baby's going to be before it's born. Adriana pondered but went unnoticed. Her mind now overwhelmed with curiosity, she decided to try to find out on her own. A loud hacking sound distracted everyone from the baby or the dragon book. Adriana looked up and found her dragon apparently choking on something. Hiccup stared at the monstrous nightmare, eyebrows furrowed with concentration. It almost looked like she was. Lily suddenly lowered her head and regurgitated a pile of the half-digested fish she had eaten for dinner not long before all over the floor in front of the newborn. Everyone's eyes widened in shock. The little Nada was tentative at first but slowly crept toward the pile, eyes on the strange dragon who suddenly seemed to want to feed her. Rather than eat right away, she approached Lily, cooing quietly. Lily made a few cooing noises in response before gently nuzzling the baby for a moment. She then pushed the little Nada toward the food. Hiccup and Fish Legs were nearly beside themselves with excitement. Oh my, did you see that, but... Lily adopted her. Hiccup was shouting, nearly hopping up and down. And they're not even the same species. Fish Legs added with a gigantic grin. Hiccup, do you know what this means? No, but it's so awesome. Hiccup replied. He wished that he could stand up and approach the little dragon but reluctantly remembered the healer's instructions about staying seated. This means we can put orphaned baby dragons with any dragon willing to take them in and not limit it to species. Fish Legs laughed out loud. Think of how many lives we could save. We could go to the hatching island every Snoggletog and retrieve all abandoned babies. Dragon book. Hiccup nearly yelled. Fish Legs, give me the dragon book. Fish Legs tossed the book to Hiccup, who caught it. The chief of the hooligans was shaking with excitement as he wrote this new information in the back of the book. Olaf was looking between the two men and laughing uproariously. Nothing has changed, he told Eric and Adriana, who had now fixed their confused expressions on him. Those two used to stay up late in the Great Hall talking about all things dragons before their parents dragged them home. That doesn't surprise me. Eric remarked with a smirk as he watched the two men act almost like teenagers again. He turned to his best friend. So Annie, you okay with our dragons raising a baby together? Are you kidding? Bring her over any time you want. Adriana threw her arms around her dragon. You are the most amazing dragon in the whole world, Lily. She then looked down at the Nada, who seemed to have eaten her fill. Eric, hey, did you ever come up with a name? Well, I went down to the library and flipped through a few books. I like the name Signa. Eric shrugged. If that's okay with you. I like it. Adriana replied. Hi, Signa. I'm your mommy's human. Signa nipped her finger affectionately before hopping back to her father. Lily pulled her head from the window and sauntered into the pen, lying across from Charger. The older dragons made little noises at each other. I think that's our cue to leave. Hiccup said at last. Good luck, Charger. He scratched the Nada's chin. Having a daughter isn't easy. Adriana, who was talking excitedly to Eric about what they were going to do as far as feeding and taking turns to fly, didn't hear his comment. After Adriana's mishap, the girl didn't return to watch any of the games. She sat down in the library and listened to the cheering outside the window. She wasn't paying any attention to it, however. She was completely focused on making up an ending to the story she had been telling Matilda. One day, as he was flying over a strange island on his dragon, the escapologist saw a tiny little hut in the middle of the woods. He might have missed it, but the acrobat's sister wasn't very good at building and some of it was falling in. He decided to fly down and help. She mimed flying downwards on a dragon. The evil sister was out looking for food, and when the escapologist heard the sound of his daughter's tears, he smashed the door open. He embraced his little girl at last. Matilda threw her arms into the air and cheered. How great! So there is a happy ending. Adriana decided to continue. Have I been so wrapped up in my grief for my wife that I have forgotten the one thing that mattered to us most? I love you so much, my daughter. I shall spend the rest of my life making it up to you. We shall be together forever. She finally smiled. Though this was a false ending to the story, she was getting quite into it anyway. But then the escapologist's thoughts turned to the acrobat's sister and a mighty rage grew inside his great heart. This demon. This villain. This monster. She has sullied the memory of my wife. She has betrayed the trust of her own sister. She has shown cruelty to the most precious reality of my marriage. Bullying children is her game, is it? Well, let us see what this creature thinks she can do when the wrath of a grown man stands before her. And so, telling his little girl he would be right back, he went to find the acrobat's sister. When he did find her, no one knows exactly what happened, only that she was never seen again. Matilda leaned forward. And what about the little girl? The escapologist went back to the hut and the little girl leaped into his arms. Because they had found each other. Adriana smiled widely. Yes, they had found each other. So, this is the ending, yes. Matilda looked at Adriana critically. You're not going to tell me something terrible happened next, are you? Miss Matilda, why would I do that? Adriana smirked. Most stories have a happy ending if you wait long enough. Yes, but you seem to like to throw sad things into your stories. Matilda stood up and put her hands on Adriana's shoulders. It is not bad to make your stories sad once in a while. But a good writer doesn't stick to the sad and the depressing for too long, just as they don't stick to the happy and cheerful for too long. A good story has to make your audience laugh and cry. That, child, is what keeps them coming back. Yes. It does, doesn't it? Adriana frowned. But I'm afraid my next story doesn't have a happy ending at all. Well, whether the ending is happy or sad, I will always want to listen. Matilda said enthusiastically. Have you ever thought about telling your stories to younger children? Adriana considered this for a moment. Once in a while. Do you think I could? Absolutely. You are so creative. Matilda walked away and began to search for something on the shelf. Yes, I suppose, but I'd have to put in more funny bits. Kids aren't as serious as grown-ups and they love to laugh. She furrowed her brow, deep in thought. You know, I never thought of it that way, but you're right. Matilda laughed. Now, where did I You see, a new shipment of books came in and I found a book you might like. Oh, here it is. She took a large, thick book off the shelf. I think you and your father liked its sequel, yes. Another spaceman book. Adriana squealed with excitement. The one Daddy and I were reading was a sequel. That actually explains a few things. Yes. I'm told that the author is working on a third book too. Now go on, take it. I read a few pages of it last night and it's absolutely fantastic. Matilda handed the large book to Adriana, who stumbled a bit as she took on its weight. It was quite a bit longer than the last. Oh, and you can keep it, but please let me read it when you're finished. Will do, Miss Matilda. Adriana wanted to hug her older friend, but the book's weight made this impossible. And thank you. As the girl walked out of the library, looking rather silly carrying such a big book, Miss Matilda chuckled to herself. No, Adriana, thank you. The final day of Thorfist fell upon them. Adriana had avoided the games as much as possible, but, on a whim, she decided to go to the last award ceremony for the youngest competitors. The ceremony went off without a hitch, but it was when Hiccup was presenting the medal to the winner of the 6-year-old girls' competition that things got interesting. The winner, of course, was Inga Jorgensen. She stood tall, or at least as tall as it is possible for a small child to stand, between her parents as Hiccup placed the medal around her neck. I am so proud of you, Inga. Hiccup said with a small smile. You did a really good job without cheating. Hey. Are you implying that Jorgensens cheat? Snotlout asked indignantly. Of course not. Hiccup laughed. No, Jorgensens are just that good. The crowd cheered for the Jorgensen girl, who beamed with pride. Snotlout and Heather were feeling quite proud of themselves as well. Oh, Snotlout, there's one other thing I wanted to mention. Hiccup tapped his friend on the shoulder. Snotlout whirled around. Look, I told you, she didn't cheat, she's been Smack. Snotlout stumbled backward as Hiccup's open palm collided with his face. A light red handprint began to form on his cheek as he tripped and fell off the platform. The audience howled with laughter and the Thorsten twins cheered loudly. Snotlout glared daggers at Hiccup. That's one. Hiccup said delightedly. Finn, who had not been told about his father's little wager with Snotlout, was both appalled and highly amused. Both he and Binnen had to be filled in by Roughnut and Toughnut as to why this had happened. Once Binnen knew the context, even he joined in the laughter. He had decided long ago that he would only laugh at someone else's mishap if the person who had gone through it laughed or smiled along, and Snotlout gave the crowd a sheepish but slightly amused smile before hopping off the platform and walking off with his wife and daughter, who were both wiping tears of mirth out of their eyes. Once the ceremony was over, the hooligans and outcasts were invited to the end of Thorfist banquet in the Great Hall. Before Hiccup could hobble away after his people on crutches, Ali the Insincere grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back so violently, the hooligan chief nearly fell over. What? How dare you interrupt the ceremony with your petty spat? You should be ashamed of yourself. Ali snarled angrily. Because Thor forbid anyone actually laugh. Hiccup rolled his eyes. Don't get smart with me. Ali grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him down so he was closer to her height. He was beginning to regret not wearing his flight suit today. The only reason we're allies is because of your father and my uncle. Now I don't have any reason to go to war with you, but one wrong move and our alliance is finished. For slapping one of my own people across the face. Ali, come on, it wasn't even unprovoked. We had a slap bet. I don't care. For once in your life, act like an adult. Ali released him. I'm warning you, Hiccup, you're on thin ice. Hiccup glared at Ali as she strutted off, clearly pleased with herself. Astrid came up behind him, looking suspiciously at the other woman. What did she want? Apparently she wants to become enemies again. Hiccup sighed deeply. And after all this, I almost agree with her. At least Alvin, for all his faults, was sincere in his hatred for my father while their feud lasted. I wouldn't worry about it, Hiccup. Astrid patted his arm. We've fought the outcasts before and we can fight them again if need be. Finn was famished. He wasn't sure why that was, since he'd eaten a decent-sized lunch mere hours before, but he loaded his plate both with hooligan and outcast dishes before deciding to sit, not with the other boys, but with Benin. The elderly man smiled at him as he seated himself on the bench and began to eat. "Think you've got enough?" Benin asked with an amused expression. "I'm hungry," Finn said through a slightly full mouth. "I was out with the boys all afternoon." "Well, far be it from me to come between you and a full plate of food." Benin shook his head, still smiling. "Though you might want to slow down. It's not going anywhere and you'll choke if you keep eating that fast." Finn looked down at his plate, chewed on a particularly stubborn piece of mutton, and swallowed. "Right, yeah. Mom's always saying that." There was a long pause as the boy took the man's advice and slowed down to enjoy his meal rather than practically inhale it. Benin looked at his closest Burkian friend and, for the first time, noticed that his shoulders were broadening. His arms, which were exposed because the great hall was quite hot with so many people, even had a bit of developing muscle. The little boy Benin had met 3 years ago was slowly growing up. He wasn't there yet and he wouldn't be for quite a long while, but it was happening. Soon his voice would change and he would begin to grow very quickly. He would probably be taller than Benin one day. Actually, judging by the stories he had heard, Finn would almost certainly be taller than Hiccup, what with the stoic genes so prominent in his appearance and behavior. Benin hadn't noticed these changes while they were happening. On some level he supposed he did because it didn't surprise him. Having never gotten the chance to be a parent himself, the older man had sort of adopted the haddocks and loved them all very much. But as Finn began to grow up and enter the transition between childhood and adulthood, Benin realized that he would also be growing older. One day his muscles would weaken and he would have to leave Finn and the haddocks to continue on their own. He glanced over at Adriana, who was sitting across from Eric and animatedly talking to him. The haddocks had made him feel needed for the first time in a long time. But he wondered just how long it would last and if he would even live to see it. "What are you thinking about?" Finn asked, pulling Benin out of his thoughts. "Oh, this and that." Benin smiled and shook his head the tiniest bit to clear it. "I'm thinking about writing something, that's all. Been a long time since I had the freedom to do something creative." "What are you going to write about?" Finn leaned in and placed his hand on his chin. "I haven't quite decided." Benin sighed deeply. "I think I know how it begins. But the ending is always the hardest part to write. You see, stories never end. They just change and begin again. Like my story didn't end when I was taken from my home and it certainly didn't end when I was freed. But as for the story, I'm hoping that its ending will be meaningful and that I will have taught someone something." "Well, you don't have to write a story to teach people." Finn chuckled. "You teach me loads of stuff." "Yes, I suppose I do, don't I?" Benin considered this for a moment. "But it can't hurt to teach a few more lessons, now can it?" "Nope." Finn paused, his eyes slowly turning back to his food. "How come you're always right?" "Because there was once a time when I was always wrong. And through being wrong, I learned what was right." Benin's smile widened when Finn looked back up at him. "You know, Inga has an incredible aim when it comes to the axe throwing. I certainly wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of her." "Yeah, she was good. But Colt's archery was amazing." Finn's head snapped up with interested. And so the boy and the man talked about the goings-on of the day. Finn loved talking about the games and Benin loved talking to Finn. He really was growing into a fine young man. Several tables over, Adriana and Eric were engaging in a very interesting discussion. "If Signa eats when we eat, I don't think we'll both have to sacrifice our dragons for too long," Eric was saying. "Maybe we could go for a flight together to teach her how to fly." "That would be great." Adriana leaned forward, her elbows on the table and her manners completely forgotten. Nissa, who was attempting to lie in her lap, made an irritated growl at being disturbed. "I think she's going to be a great flyer too. She's already really hard to catch on land. She'll probably be faster than both Charger and Lil." Adriana was interrupted by Dana, who bumped into her so hard, she nearly fell into her food. Gritting her teeth, she ignored the other girls' shrill laughter as they walked away. Eric sighed deeply as he watched them crowd around a table. "Aren't you going to tell someone about them?" What they are doing to you isn't right. Your dad would be really mad if he knew. I don't want to tell him. Adriana shook her head vehemently and scratched her terrible terror behind the ears. He always saves me. But I'm old enough to save myself now, like I should have done before. Are you saying you don't trust him? Eric leaned in and fixed a suspicious glare on her. She recoiled slightly. I'm saying that I don't want to tell him. And you shouldn't either. Annie. You're my best friend in the world, Eric. Come on, let me handle this. Please. Adriana widened her eyes so that she looked irresistibly adorable. Oh. Eric wanted to shut his eyes, but she was so distracting. Fine. Ali the insincere, who was seated on an elevated platform, stood up and waved her arms for silence. Hooligans and outcasts, this has been a wonderful Thorfest. We've had winners from both tribes and we've hopefully made new friends. Adriana glanced over at Dana and sat lower in her chair. I would like to propose a toast to our alliance and to peace between our tribes. She and hundreds of other Vikings raised their cups and drank. Well, almost all of them did. Ali let out a shriek of indignation as wine dribbled down the front of her shirt through tiny holes that had been poked in her goblet. Adriana smiled triumphantly and looked over at her father, who seemed too busy laughing to care about the angry looks he was getting from several outcasts. Hiccup didn't stop laughing until the great hall was once again filled with the sounds of many conversations. He had dearly needed the laugh. Astrid leaned over and put her head on his shoulder. It's getting late, she said sleepily. How long do we have to be here? Hiccup put his arm around her and kissed the top of her head. We can sneak out when the crowd dies down a bit. Outcasts'll probably want to pack for the trip back tomorrow. It's going to be nice not having them around. Astrid said thoughtfully. Is it wrong of me to say that? No, I completely agree. We are never doing this again. Hiccup stifled a yawn. It's too exhausting. He glanced at Tari, whose hair was dark brown again. Though whoever was pulling those pranks deserves his own medal. That was brilliant and it certainly kept us from getting bored. Yes, it was. Astrid snuggled into his arm. I just want to go to bed. A few more minutes, Astrid. Hiccup gently placed his head atop hers. I am so glad this is almost over. Well, we learned a lot now. Astrid was yawning. Like that our kids are growing up and have stopped listening to authority. Why do kids have to grow up? Hiccup asked sadly. They were so cute when they were tiny. Yes, when they weren't getting themselves caught in netter traps or running naked through the village, they were perfect. Astrid chuckled. Hey now, that was just once and they ended up being okay. Hiccup lightly nudged his dozing wife. But really, they won't be kids much longer. Maybe we should tell them more than that. They are going to eventually grow up and get awkward. Not tonight. Astrid whispered. I wasn't talking about tonight. But they really are getting to about that age when they are going to need to know what to expect. Hiccup gently rubbed Astrid's shoulder. They grow up so fast. Yeah, they do. Astrid muttered. But that's just the next adventure. And as Hiccup watched both his children talking animatedly to their closest friends, he decided that his wife was right. True, their childhood was nearly over. But that didn't mean it was the end. Because as Binen had said to Finn, stories don't always have endings, just new beginnings. This is Berk. Each and every Viking who lives here is his or her own person. No two people are alike. Differences are what make us unique, what makes life interesting. Unfortunately, some people are even more different than others. As some scramble and fight their way to the top, others fall behind and are forgotten. But once in a while, those rejects are strong enough to fight back. While others may be competing for recognition, they are evening the playing field. And so you could say that this is why they are every bit as important as those who naturally know how to get ahead. Life may not be easy for those who differ from most everyone else. But that's what makes it an adventure. And with enough intelligence and cunning, they can definitely change their own stories. The end.